In an elegant palace, a commotion begins. Someone enters, with elegant shoes that echo on the refined stone floors. Servants greet their master, who only asks, "Where is she?" The noble young man rushes past the servants, who tell him that the young lady was in her chambers, also declaring that the gods were probably watching over her, for her will to return home had been remarkable. One of the servants opens the lady's bedroom door, while the nobleman advances toward her. The young man, with a worried and tired expression, asks the servants how she is. An older man is surprised by the young man's presence, revealing to us that he is Lord Charles. He tells him that her fever had already gone down and she doesn't seem to have any injuries. The noble Charles listens silently. The man looks around uneasily and tells him there was, however, one thing. Lord Charles asks seriously, "What is wrong with my sister?" After an awkward moment of silence, the man begins to explain, and Charles grows impatient. He quickly turns to enter the room where his sister is. The young man bursts in abruptly, calling for Rosalind and asking if the young lady is all right. The young woman was sitting on the bed, wearing a delicate white nightgown. A moment of silence occurs as they stare at each other. Charles tries to call her once more, apprehensively. Pressing her lips together, the young woman awkwardly repeats the questions her brother had just asked, which shocks everyone present. The young woman is Rosalind of House Heatherwood, our protagonist. Her characteristic beauty comes from her beautiful green eyes and long dark hair. After the tragedy on that fateful hunting day, her body was the only one that hadn't been found. The Imperial hunting tournament took place in a border county under the responsibility of House Thornbush. That place was chosen because of the growing presence of large wild animals and monsters. The hunting tournament was an attempt to calm the people's fears by displaying the Divine Empire's strength. The imperial crown and scepter could be considered divine works for their elegance, their intricate gold details, and their embedded gemstones. Members of the imperial family and noble knights from all over the empire participated in the tournament. The White Knights from the imperial order that served the second prince. The Green Knights from the second imperial order that served the third prince. The Knights of Houses Thornbush and Spindrift, who served the nobles of their respective houses. Together, they formed a magnificent procession that resembled a powerful army marching to a great battle. However, something tragic happened on the fifth day of the competition. The Kingdom of Balta, a neighbor to the Ilibenian Empire, formed an undeclared battlefront that struck the knights gathered near the border for the tournament. Despite the knights from all houses fighting bravely, the battle lasted until sunrise. What they did not expect was that the Kingdom of Balta had developed a deadly poison that not even divine power could overcome. Such misfortune took many lives of the Empire, leaving behind only the wounded. The hunting tournament had been ended and the spectators were sent back to their homes. Some knights stayed behind, intending to gather those who had fallen after the carnage. The White Knights suffered immense losses, including their commander. They counted the dead and wounded and arranged to take them back to the capital. As the aide of the Order of White Knights went through his list, he noticed there was one person missing. It was Rosalind, heiress of House Heatherwood. She was a knight of the highest caliber. What she lacked in physical strength, she made up for in diligence and hard work. The late vice commander of the White Knights held her in the highest regard. The distressed commander sought knights from other houses to try to discover if Rosalind was among the wounded rescued by them. They searched endlessly, but the knight with the long black hair was nowhere to be found. Frustrated with their failure, they gave up the search and made their way back home. Later, however, House Heatherwood sent its own vassals to search for the missing young lady. After 6 long days following the battle with the enemy kingdom, they finally found Rosalind, gravely wounded on the edge of a cliff. Back to the present, Charles lets out a long sigh and asks someone if she truly didn't remember him. The young man places a hand on his face, overwhelmed by the information. The man, who revealed himself to be the family doctor, tells his lord that he fears the young lady does not even remember herself and does not seem to know where she is. But somehow, the young woman seemed to remember the family seal. She gazed upon that banner with her deep green eyes. Carefully enunciating the word, she said the name of her family, Heatherwood. The doctor believes she is suffering from temporary memory loss, but he had hopes that she would make a full recovery. Charles asks if he was sure of what he was claiming. The man explains that Rosalind is still very fragile, and at that moment he was not able to guarantee anything about the future. Charles reasons that if what people say is true, that the mind and body are connected, then possibly when the young woman's body recovers, her mind might improve as well. Then the nobleman orders the white cloths to be taken down from the palace walls to end the public vigil, for it was time for the empire to know that Rosalind had returned home. The young man also asks if his father had been informed and says that he would soon thank the Countess of House Thornbush for all her help. With a wave of his hand, Charles tells the doctor to arrange a gift for the Countess and that he himself will write a letter of gratitude. Rising from his desk, Charles orders that a lady-in-waiting be assigned to his sister and that all access to the young lady's chamber be restricted, and that, under no circumstance, any word about her condition should be leaked. Then, the young man asks if the lady had eaten anything yet. The embarrassed maids replied that they had prepared a light lunch for her. It corresponded to a meal prescribed by the doctor for a more weakened patient. However, Rosalind kept asking for more food, and in the end, she had already eaten 3 full meals. The maids judged that she could now eat normally. Upon hearing that, Charles asks that his dinner be served together with his sisters in her chambers. Charles stays alone in his office as the maids leave the room. He looks to the side, reflecting after that conversation. The young man feels relieved to know she was eating well, which was something expected. As he looks at a portrait of the two of them, he thinks again how good it is that she is safe and sound at home. She is his older sister, and he owes her much. The young man thinks as he gently holds the portrait, intending to talk to her during dinner and tell her how happy he is that she returned. Moments later, Charles displays a look of pure disgust as he hears loud chewing noises. Before him, his sister Rosalind vigorously devours large pieces of bread. The maids watch the dramatic dinner scene as Rosalind devours the food. Such behavior reminds Charles that the doctor had told him that, in addition to her memory loss, the young lady was having some behavioral issues, and still seemed quite confused. Suddenly, Rosalind tries to grab the meat from Charles's plate, abruptly waking the young man from his thoughts. She seizes a piece of meat vigorously, knocking part of the salad off the plate. Rosalind chews the chunks of meat intensely, getting herself completely messy in the process, staining her nightgown. Charles then realizes the seriousness of the doctor's words, who had told him that she might temporarily behave like a child, more like a cave woman. But fine. A silence hangs between the two, broken only by Rosalind's loud chewing. Charles takes a deep breath, assessing how to handle that strange situation. He turns to one of the maids and asks if Rosalind really should be eating red meat. Wouldn't something lighter be better for her stomach? Our protagonist explains to him that while she was recovering, she ate only soup and porridge, but that morning they had given her small pieces of meat in her soup, which had done her much good. Charles gives an enigmatic smile. He looks at his completely ruined plate after his sister tore away his steak. The maid apologizes and tells him she will fetch a new plate for him, to which Charles thanks her. He serves himself a spoonful of soup. While dining, the young man reflects as he watches his sister. He wonders if his sister had always had that ravenous appetite for meat. A bit hesitant, he asks her to slow down her bites, as that amount of red meat could upset her stomach. The young woman looks at him, and her striking green eyes show an alert expression. However, ignoring him, she calmly returns to eating. In Charles and Rosalind's past, he remembers his older sister warning him to chew food well before swallowing. And back in the present, he watches with a distant gaze the scene that is the opposite of the elegance his sister once had. To him, that memory was a strange reminder of when they used to eat together when they were younger. He even recalls her giving him lessons in etiquette, table manners, and many other things. However, his whole life had not prepared him for the moment when he would have to teach her all of that again, which made him nostalgic for those days. Rosalind stares at her hand, dirty with meat sauce. The young woman begins to lick the sauce, but she is suddenly interrupted by her brother, who grabs her hand, stopping her. He approaches her, telling her that she should not do such a thing. Hesitantly, he says that such behavior is not befitting of a lady like her. The elegant room is bathed in the light of late afternoon. Meanwhile, the dining table does not display the same order, with messy plates, scattered salad, and meat sauce spilled here and there. The young man tries to help her remember, explaining that he is Charles, her younger brother by 2 years, and that it had been some time since they last saw each other because of her duties as a knight. While she bites into more pieces of meat, Rosalind listens to her brother recounting that they used to exchange letters while she was away. Finally, he tells her that she was a knight of the highest imperial order. Charles narrates that she was part of the Order of the White Knights, who protected the second prince. She wielded a beautiful sword, and her armor reflected countless rays of light. However, Rosalind calmly watches him as she eats a small piece of bread. The young man doesn't seem to know if she is really listening to him. Determined, he continues explaining the story, telling her how their father was the Count of Heatherwood, responsible for protecting the border with other knights. Because of certain imperial duties, he could not be there, but he had been deeply worried about Rosalind's well-being. Their father was a very serious man, and his scars gave him an intimidating air. In fact, because of his frightening expression, little children cried in fear when they saw him. But despite everything, he was a good man who abhorred any abuse of power. He took every measure to ensure that no noble house disrespected the people of the empire. He was such a respected man that they even made a wine in his honor. Rosalind listens attentively to her brother's description. Our protagonist, with a distant look, whispers the word wine. Charles laughs at the small gesture, apologizing, saying that he should not have mentioned wine, for his sister had a severe grape allergy and therefore could not drink. After saying that, something catches the young man by surprise. Pondering for a moment, he remembers that his steak had probably been seasoned with wine. He was sure that her food had been prepared differently, but his probably wasn't. He stands up abruptly, worried about her. Running toward his sister, he grabs her shoulders and asks how she is managing to breathe. He keeps bombarding her with questions, as she used to have itching all over her body, to which the young woman simply shakes her head. Charles asks her to open her mouth wide, and she goes, "Ah." Rosalind is carefully examined by her younger brother. He takes a deep breath and feels relieved to see that nothing serious had happened and that she was fine. While he still worries about a delayed reaction, one of the maids bursts into the room. She is clearly overcome with worry for the young lady. The maid approaches her, repeating the same procedure as her brother, asking if she could breathe, if her throat was swollen. Charles lets out a deep sigh of relief. The young maid turns to her master, apologizing for what happened, explaining that she never imagined Rosalind would take food from his plate. He says it's all right, that he should have stopped it. Rosalind listens attentively as they thank the sacred entity that had protected her. Or perhaps she had overcome her allergies, which could have happened as well. The young man leans against the table as he hears the maid tell him she will fetch some medicine just in case. Charles looks to the side, slightly worried about something. His sister was silently holding a glass of wine, apparently reflecting, lost in thought. She brings the wine to her lips. Her brother notices that she hadn't even touched the avocado salad, which used to be her favorite dish, but apparently she had licked every plate that had wine sauce. He reflects on what happened for a few moments. Charles remembers a Rosalind from the past, advising him always to pay attention to details, no matter how small. In the past, his sister had taught him to notice the raise of an eyebrow if someone rolled their eyes even slightly. Basically, a lesson in body language. She had taught him that even the smallest gestures could be a direct confession. Charles watches his sister, both in silence, as if they were far away from there. A new day dawns in the Heatherwood family palace. Early in the morning, a few maids talk quietly in the corridor about Lady Rosalind's health. One of them cheerfully tells her friends that the young lady had already gone back to eating with cutlery, and another confesses that she can hardly believe that this was the same Rosalind. As the young women chatted about how the lady used to be incredibly intelligent and now seemed more approachable, a very hurried Rosalind rushes past them. She briskly overtakes the maids who were talking in the corridor. The girls are left flustered by the brief incident and try to justify it by saying things like, it's healthy to walk barefoot, and that their lady must be recovering well. They also kindly notice how Lady Rosalind now lets her long, dark hair flow freely. It's something so wild yet still alluring. They find their lady to be a very sophisticated woman. After that, whispers spread throughout the palace. They also reach the streets and the people, who comment on the noble lady's health. Charles nervously reads the news about his sister, wondering where on earth they got all of that from. The papers said that Lady Rosalind Heatherwood had been blessed by divinity, and after 6 days in the Valley of Shadows, she had returned. And the next day, she opened her eyes, dispelling the darkness that surrounded her house, overcoming many wounds to bring hope to the people. One of the butlers hesitantly says that those were the rumors circulating through the city. Charles finds it all very interesting. He realizes that, indeed, he had allowed her to walk barefoot through the palace a few times. But how could the rumors have evolved into something so absurd? The noble young man knows well how children adored her and put her on a pedestal, but that was far beyond their influence. He hoped that those rumors wouldn't spiral out of control. The butler says he will keep an eye on the tone of the gossip. The butler also takes the opportunity to remind Charles that his mother, Countess Heatherwood, had returned and that she asked to have lunch with her 2 children. Charles promptly offers to personally bring his sister. The young man walks elegantly through the palace corridors. Then something catches his attention. He sees his sister sitting by a window, gazing at something in the distance. Rosalind seems to be peacefully asleep, leaning against the wall. The young woman's lips appear to whisper something inaudible. Charles pauses for a few moments to better understand what was happening. Through one of the windows, he sees some maids talking about the palace's daily chores. The young women cheerfully chat about working together to take better care of the ladies' quarters, unaware that they are being watched by their master. Inside, Rosalind seems to nap while the maids talk outside, one saying she'd like to buy clothes, another suggesting they go after work. Though deeply distracted, Rosalind quietly repeats the words she hears the maids saying from the garden. Excited, the young women talk about their plans to go shopping after work. Charles watches all this in astonishment. He once again recalls the memories he had of his sister before the accident, the 2 of them holding hands. The Rosalind of the past always advised Charles to notice the smallest details, as they were always extremely revealing. Our protagonist tells her brother that even the tiniest nuances could expose which people were covered in lies, warning him to remain vigilant and saying that she trusted he could do that. After all, those of House Heatherwood were known for being perceptive and shrewd. So for Charles, if everything was different except the face, would he still be able to recognize Rosalind in that stranger? Suddenly, the young woman turns to him. This catches Charles completely off guard, making him flinch. He swallows hard, still surprised. Trying to break the ice, he approaches his sister, informing her that their mother had come to visit them and wanted to have lunch with both of them. Upon hearing the word lunch, Rosalind's eyes begin to sparkle just at the thought of good food. The young woman starts to stand up and takes Charles's hand as she says his name. She speaks perfectly clearly, saying it would be a great idea for them all to go together. Charles is surprised by the young woman's composure, since moments before she could barely handle simple things. He reasons that Rosalind was repeating the words she had overheard from the maids, as if, somehow, she was adapting. Sometime later, he asks one of the maids to prepare Rosalind for lunch and says he'll be waiting in his office. As he walks through the great corridor of the palace, Charles is followed by one of his butlers, asking if he's sure it's a good idea. The truth is, Charles still hadn't told his mother about his sister's accident. The man advises the young noble that keeping that information secret could affect the Countess's mood, to which Charles replies that he thought it best that way. He remembered that his mother had gone to one of the imperial villages to recover her health, and since she had just returned, the young man didn't think it wise to worry her too much. The butler, somewhat intrusively, continues to question Charles, asking if he intended to tell the Countess how Rosalind was a little... Abruptly, Charles turns to him, asking what he was talking about, and the butler stumbles over his words, saying how adorable she was. He explains to the butler that, obviously, his mother would notice a change in her daughter, who had once been perfectly feminine, but that he didn't intend to share any more details with her, at least for a while. Letting out long sighs, he feels relieved that Rosalind has gone back to using cutlery and has learned some proper table manners. He would have to find a way to handle that delicate situation. He briefly remembers her repeating the words spoken by the maids. Analyzing the situation, Charles thinks that she seems to learn quickly. But even so, all of that was very strange. Already prepared for lunch, Charles goes over some questions with Rosalind, telling her what to say in each situation in case their mother asked. The young man feels excited, and the 2 of them head together to meet the Countess. Inside the hall, the Countess greets her 2 children. She wears a beautiful purple dress, decorated with white lace and a pearled ornament in her hair. Charles tries to distract his mother, who starts telling him about her time away from home, but suddenly her attention turns to Rosalind. She quickly grabs her daughter, pinching her cheeks, saying that she had heard everything about how she had disappeared, worriedly asking if she was hurt. But the young woman simply replies that she was not. Squeezing Rosalind's cheeks even more, as if she were a child, her mother tells her that she should have listened to her and given up on that whole business of being a knight. Trying to fix the situation, he tells his mother that she must be tired after the long trip and that it would be good for her to sit down. Rosalind also takes her seat at the table. Charles feels relieved that Rosalind isn't talking much, and the young woman seems quite entertained by the dishes. Everyone sits at the table while the servants accompany the family lunch. Rosalind reaches out to grab a small piece of bread, but it rolls off the table. The bread falls to the floor, and Rosalind absent-mindedly turns to pick it up, alarming the butlers. However, instead of behaving like a delicate lady, she grabs the bread harshly and starts eating it, ignoring everyone at the table. Charles and his mother watch in astonishment as the young woman disregards the traditional manners expected of a lady and devours a piece of bread at the table. However, the young woman composes herself and delicately wipes her face, surprising them even more. She looks at the two of them with a calm and gentle gaze. Internally, Charles thinks he's completely screwed. The atmosphere at the table grows heavy. No one seems to understand anything anymore. And Rosalind, satisfied, continues gently wiping her face. Charles blames himself for not having told his sister that she shouldn't eat food from the floor, as the thought had never even crossed his mind. His mother repeatedly looks from him to her, unable to comprehend what just happened. The Countess dries delicate tears with a handkerchief, moments after Charles explained to her what had happened to Rosalind. Her tearful mother says that she had never been the most beautiful, but at least she had once been the most intelligent in the Empire. But now, in the background, Charles asks his mother to stop that speech. Turning to the young man, his mother asks him if their father already knew what had happened, to which he replies that he had only informed him that Rosalind had hit her head. While she eats, her mother observes her with those familiar green eyes, wondering if perhaps she had become less intelligent. Rosalind is very entertained with lunch, while her younger brother explains to their mother that she wasn't any less clever. However, his mother was determined to understand what was wrong with her daughter. After so much talking and worry, the Countess begins to feel a headache coming on and starts to feel a bit unwell. Charles approaches his mother, offering to take her to her room. Sometime later, in a study, a large pile of papers falls onto a table. A butler or royal aide leans against the tall stack of papers and asks if Charles has any idea what that is. To which he replies, "Were those papers all the information he had requested earlier?" The young man tells him that he worked hard to gather all that information. Charles studies the sheets attentively. The young man smiles smugly while his master reads the documents. In any case, the young butler declares his surprise to see someone Charles's age interested in folk legends and fairy tales. But the young man continues, saying that after thinking a bit, he was able to understand the reasons behind that search for information. Yet Charles remains silent as he reads. In that elegant office, the two men stay silent for a few moments. The young butler begins to ask about a hunch he had, to which Charles interrupts, explaining that he needs to focus to understand a hypothesis he is developing. He asks the young man to leave and to tell no one about it. A window opens with a faint creak. Soon after, Charles steps out to get some fresh air on his balcony, which is surrounded by the vast forest of the Empire. He turns his attention back to the legend he was reading, which began by narrating that all who wish to enter the forest should be careful, or they might be devoured by an evil shadow. The legend said that this shadow was known as a dark presence that roamed the woods, passing unnoticed by all. It hid and imitated the behavior of humans unlucky enough to encounter it. The details of that legend varied depending on the region of the Empire, but they all shared some common traits, such as the deep parts of the forest that no one dared to explore, and a creature born of shadows that inhabited that forest. Charles reads all of it with a bit of disbelief, turning the pages one by one. Then, he finds the account of a villager who had seen the figure. He was gathering medicinal herbs when he fell off a ravine and fainted from the fall. When he woke up, he was paralyzed on the ground, too weak to move, and he remembers lying there for some time, staring at the foliage. But suddenly, he began to feel something approaching him. At first, he thought it was just the shadow of the nearby trees. It was hard to see through the morning mist, but when the villager looked more closely, he was able to notice the shadow moving dangerously. Though difficult to discern, he could see it coming closer and closer. He described that moment as the most terrifying sight of his life. He had never believed monsters existed, but he knew well a legend told by his tavern companions. A story about a creature of shadows that sensed bad omens. The men of the village said that when something was about to die nearby, the shadow would manifest. Since he was alone in a clearing in the woods, wounded and unable to move, possibly that shadow was about to claim a new victim. At first, it only hovered over him, as if waiting for the right moment to attack. In a desperate impulse, he grabbed some of the medicinal berries that hadn't burst during the fall, and he ate as many as he could, in a frantic attempt to recover somehow. He hoped they would help him heal, since the pain in his body had subsided. However, even as he began to feel a bit better, the villager saw the creature slowly crawling back toward the forest. The villager couldn't understand why it was called a shadow, since at first he thought it was merely a small cloud of smoke. But after watching it for some time, something very strange happened. That cloud of smoke took the form of a human. And though he couldn't make out any distinct features, that shadow had become his shadow. Charles is startled by a noise behind him and turns abruptly to see what happened. Silence fills the balcony, and only the wind moves the glass doors. The young man peers into the dark interior of the room but doesn't seem to notice anything. Carefully tucking the papers into his vest, he decides to check what it was. Quickly, he grabs his sword, knowing that any thief would find nothing valuable in his study. He begins to open the door slowly, and a blurred figure moves frantically right in front of him. He readies himself to strike, demanding to know who's there, and comes face to face with his sister, Rosalind. The young woman looks at him without any reaction or sign of fear. Charles freezes, especially upon seeing his sword so close to her face. She gazes at him without any interest or fear, seemingly unfazed by such a deadly blade near her. The young man hesitates, unable to say a word. He looks down and notices something unusual: reddish stains on the floor. An intruder had been annihilated right there on the floor of his study, surrounded by several other marks. He looks at his sister's wet hands, wondering if she had killed the man with her bare hands. How could that even be possible if the man had been armed? Charles realizes something that chills him to the core. This wasn't humanly possible. It seemed like the work of something supernatural and possibly dangerous. Using his strength, he manages to knock Rosalind to the floor, using his sword to pin her down. Terrifyingly, our protagonist stares at him with an empty gaze, and though trembling, the young man musters the courage to finally ask her, who was she, truly? She tries to persuade him by calling him by his name. The blade trembles near her neck, but that doesn't seem to frighten her. Charles is swept into the past, remembering his sister's affection and how she had once been a completely different person. In deep denial, the young man cannot hold back, and tears stream down his face. He cannot accept that the woman standing before him could be his sister. Now, in a threatening tone, he asks the creature if she thinks he would be incapable of hurting her just because she looks like Rosalind. He orders the creature to reveal itself to him immediately. Crying intensely, he commands her to reveal why she is there and what she has done with his sister. The young woman remains silent for a few moments, while the sharp blade of the sword gleams under the moonlight. Suddenly, the woman's gaze turns venomous, the green hue glowing and her pupils slitted like those of a poisonous serpent. Touching the sword with her stained hands, she reveals herself to be a shadow. Charles watches her silently as tears fall from his face. The woman lying there before him declares herself to be Rosalind's shadow. Her greenish eyes gleamed dangerously, resembling those of a snake. For millennia, a shadow had lived in the forests near the mountains, long before the first human civilizations created an empire. At times, the shadow took the form of a raven. Other times, it disguised itself as a delicate insect. At other moments, it took the shape of a wild beast, with sharp claws and pointed teeth, but always with the same red eyes that betrayed its identity. When it transformed, the shadow became a creature far stronger and fiercer than any other wild animal that roamed the forest. However, this malevolent shadow had never been categorized as a monster, because to be called a monster, one must first be seen. In its primitive form, it was nothing more than a subtle black mist or a pile of sand. Without a solid physical body, it could easily dissolve and vanish into the forest. Despite its ferocity, the creature was not an excellent hunter, but when assuming the form of a little rabbit with red eyes, it searched the forest for those on the brink of death. Because of this, the creature sometimes went long periods without feeding and chose to hide near cliffs, waiting for other beings to fall. There, on the enchanted mountain near the Thornbush estate, the disguised creature waited for conflicts among humans to provide it with a snack. 2 years ago, a new countess was proclaimed in House Thornbush, and she had made a vow to annihilate all the monsters on her family's lands. To do so, she invited hunters and mercenaries into her section of the forest, which led to a decrease in animals and other creatures. This act reduced the prey of the shape-shifting shadow, forcing it to wait. One day, the creature caught a scent. A young knight had fallen from a cliff, breathing her last breaths. Then, for the creature to feed, it needed to assume its original form, black smoke, and so it did. However, as a mythological being, it knew there were consequences to feeding on something alive, so it had to wait longer. The malevolent shadow approached Rosalind, realizing the human was close to death. It was not the first time it had to wait in that place. The steep mountain abyss rarely offered a merciful end to those who fell. Rosalind watched the shadow drawing near, but the young woman could not move. That time, something unexpected happened. Rosalind, almost without strength, called out to the creature, which for the first time in millennia saw something different in the gaze of a future victim. The shadow noticed that the woman's eyes showed neither fear nor tears. The shadow stared into the woman's eyes as she weakly tried to raise one of her hands. What the shadow saw there was a mixture of curiosity and resolve. Our brave protagonist, trembling, touches the approaching black smoke with her fingers. Suddenly, Rosalind manages to grab a fragment of the shadow, surprising even the lethal creature. The wounded woman pleads with great effort that the shadow please help her, no matter what it was. The shadow stirs around the young woman. In that moment, it was as if the woman's words had touched something long dormant within that creature. Incredibly, the shadow takes the form of a young girl with short black hair, yet keeping her characteristic red eyes. The younger girl looks at Rosalind, saying that she would not survive anyway, and that she could not save her. Rosalind bites her lips as if struggling to say something more. Finally, Rosalind tells the shadow that it may devour her. The two young women stare at each other as if in that instant, time itself had stopped. The young knight asks that they make a pact, offering her life to the shadow in exchange. That desperate request was made with a sincere smile. That gesture intrigued the shadow, for it was the first smile anyone had ever directed at her in her entire existence. The shadow girl asks what Rosalind would wish for in return. And then, in the depths of the great imperial forest, Rosalind makes a great request of the shadow, and the red-eyed girl listens to her attentively. Amid the darkness of the night, a human and an entity sealed a forbidden pact. Returning to the present time, a new day dawns over the Heatherwood Palace. Charles watches something carefully through the window. In the garden of the estate, Rosalind strolls with her maids. They all laugh and play as they choose a spot for a picnic. The young man knew very well that the maids were very fond of his sister. He wonders if they suspected anything about the real identity of whoever was in Rosalind's body. One of the young maids asked if Lady Rosalind had liked the flowers that had just bloomed. The noble protagonist simply replied that she was more beautiful than all those flowers combined. The maid blushes deeply at the response, and the others are delighted by such affection. Charles can hardly believe what happened before his very eyes. Now, turning to another young woman beside her, Rosalind gives yet another compliment, saying that she was even more beautiful. Charles knows very well that his sister used to melt people's hearts with her charm. The young women laugh, saying that the memory loss had been just a rumor and that this was the Rosalind they had always loved. However, Charles knew the truth. That young woman was not his sister. The night before, the woman had revealed herself to be Rosalind's shadow. She had also confessed that she was there to protect someone, and Charles insisted that she tell him the truth. Furious, he demanded to know who she was protecting, and the answer caught him off guard. The shadow was there to protect the leader of the White Knights. Charles steps away from the young woman, removing the sword from her neck. She remains silent as he touches his face, disappointed by the answer. He mentally complains about why she had to mention that man. He was the only person his sister had been obsessed with protecting, despite that behavior going against their father's wishes. His sword falls to the ground with a metallic clang. Claiming that the night was rather cold, he simply tells the creature to go to her room and rest. Sister, that had happened 2 weeks ago. By this point, the new Rosalind already knows proper etiquette and no longer eats anything off the floor, appearing more like the person she once was. Furthermore, she was quickly learning new words, although at times she seemed to remember rather than learn. Charles shrugs uneasily at the creature. Rosalind waves from the garden, displaying a friendly smile. He hesitates for a few moments, uncertain, but the young man decides to give in and offers a small wave back. She lets out a soft giggle while eating an apple. Then the young woman runs toward the maids who had already set up the picnic. The butler asks Charles if everything is all right with him, to which he replies that yes, it is. He has always strived to be a good brother. He remembers how much his sister used to praise him, saying he was a good boy. Determined, he resolves that he won't change that now. Charles holds some papers while reflecting, and decides to throw them into the fire, out of respect for his sister's wishes. He would keep that secret from then on. The young man was determined to carry on with it, no matter the cost. The pages quickly vanish amid the flames. A new day brightens the Heatherwood Palace. Suddenly, it is announced that Sir Raymond of House Ballion has just arrived to see Rosalind. Charles had clearly stated that visitors were forbidden. No one outside the family could know about her condition. Charles dashes through the palace, asking the servants if Sir Raymond was there to find out whether Rosalind would return to the Order of Knights, but they only reply that he was in the study. An anxious maid confesses that Sir Raymond ignored all their requests and went to Rosalind's room. Charles panics, asking if no one had stopped him. While the maid tries to justify herself, Charles races up the stairs, running toward his sister's chambers. He arrives breathless at the top of the stairs. Bursting through the door, Charles demands to know what was happening. Suddenly, Rosalind stomps hard on someone's hand. Furious, she asks if Sir Raymond wanted to meet his end right there and then. The man, kneeling on the floor, trembles in fear as the young woman steps on his hand. Charles quickly rushes toward the knight, who is writhing in pain and trembling uncontrollably. Rosalind watches expressionlessly as the man trembles on his knees, while her brother tries to help him. Suddenly, Sir Raymond faints completely, startling Charles. A few hours later, in the Heatherwood Palace, there is a large bruise on Sir Raymond's abdomen as he lies groaning in pain. Charles, a little exhausted after the whole ordeal, asks Rosalind what had happened. His sister simply replies that the knight was a very, very bad man. Charles scolds her, saying she can't go around calling people that way. Now, turning to a maid, he asks what had really happened. The surprised young woman begins to explain. She says that Sir Raymond had been so happy to see Lady Rosalind well that he ran to her and gave her a big hug, but that he hadn't made any inappropriate advances. The maid apologizes to Charles, telling him that it was all her fault. Some time ago, while they were taking care of Rosalind, the young women had told her not to let anyone touch her that way. One of them even said there were many bad men out there who would do anything to touch a beautiful woman like her. And if something ever happened, the maid had told Rosalind what to do. She should give him a good beating, and only then call her brother Charles, who would take care of the rest. That was exactly why the young woman felt so guilty about what happened with Sir Raymond. She hadn't realized that Rosalind might still not remember people very well. In the afternoon, Charles makes Rosalind repeat several times that she will not hurt anyone else. And he keeps asking her to repeat it a few more times to make sure that she truly won't hurt anyone again. Charles feels relieved that, even though Rosalind had attacked Sir Raymond Ballion, a noble knight of the Order of the White Knights, he and Rosalind were very close friends, and he wouldn't hold a grudge. Rosalind asks if she can attack him. Charles answers no. Fulfilling his role as a brother, he explains to her that she can defend herself however she wishes from anyone threatening her, with a sword or any other weapon. But if they aren't dangerous, she doesn't need to do anything. However, he continues, saying that if she ever harms an innocent person, she will be sent to a very bad place, where a very evil man will be waiting for her. Interrupting their conversation, someone knocks on the door, announcing that Sir Raymond is finally awake. He looks terrible, as if recovering from a great medieval battle. Rosalind sits beside him, apologizing, and he looks terrified just seeing her approach. He lifts his shirt, showing the large bruise she left on him. Raymond asks if she is really Rosalind, the eldest daughter of House Heatherwood. She bows politely and confirms that she is. Still quite disoriented, he asks if she is the same Rosalind who beat him up earlier, to which she coldly confirms again. The knight thanks her for the apology, but confesses that wasn't what worried him. He watches Rosalind as she goes to grab some cookies, and he is astonished by her strength as she grabs several with one hand, breaking a few in the process. Even more, he's shocked to see her eating them while completely ignoring a lady's etiquette, and Charles feels deeply embarrassed. Sir Raymond tries to explain himself, while the young woman innocently looks at her brother. The knight asks if she's become funnier, but Charles tries to cover it up, claiming that she's still recovering from the accident. Then he turns to Rosalind and asks if she intends to attack him again. With an indifferent expression, she says no. Soon after, he takes the opportunity to hug her again. Still holding Rosalind, he says how grateful he is to see her alive. They take the chance to enjoy a delicious afternoon tea, and while they talk, Raymond says he suspects the ambush was caused by the Black Moon. Sir Raymond realizes the young woman had forgotten about them as well. The nobleman begins to explain that the Black Moon was an order of dark magic worshippers from the neighboring empire, Balta. He continues his explanation, telling her that unlike the divine powers the imperial family possessed, there existed an opposing force that dealt with forbidden spells. The Order of the Black Moon worshipped a goddess who came from darkness and chaos. To them, she was the only entity in the universe. They claimed that the goddess of light herself was not real. But the empire's eldest prince was blessed with the strongest powers in the empire, which made him the main target of the Black Moon. Raymond reminds Rosalind that after several failed attempts to attack the prince, a special order of knights was formed, the White Knights, of which they were both members. Our protagonist chews more cookies while Charles watches her, anxious for a reaction, and Raymond wonders if she was even listening. Recalling the tragic event of the past, he says they lost many good knights, including the vice commander himself. He asks if she remembers him. The young woman replies that she does not. Raymond doesn't want to upset her during her recovery, so he changes the subject to tell her that, because of that, another knight had been promoted to commander. As for himself, he had become the new vice commander. He gives a smug smile, expecting her to congratulate him, but Rosalind merely asks if that was supposed to be a good thing. Deeply disappointed, Raymond tells her that it was a promotion, and although that was good, it also meant he would have a lot of paperwork to deal with. And there was one more thing. He reveals to Rosalind that she had been promoted to a higher rank within the Order, as she had performed exceptionally well on her last mission. She was only a few steps away from joining the personal guard of the eldest prince. Charles silently observes his sister, thinking that, in another life, this would have been wonderful news for Rosalind. He recalls the creature that had taken his sister's body, telling him with serpent-like eyes that she had made a promise to protect the master of the White Knights. The young man wonders why the commander would place her closer to the prince's guard. After all, he knew that House Heatherwood was sworn to the other prince. At last, Raymond says that was the news he needed to share. But Charles is a shrewd man and realizes that the knight had forgotten one detail. So Raymond asks what Charles is talking about, and then sees Rosalind eating more cookies. Outside, in a training field, the knight wants to test how much she remembers. He asks Rosalind to take her sword. She begins to unsheath her sword, decorated with golden engravings. Our protagonist skillfully wields her sword, a gleaming blade that seems to have been sculpted by the gods. Rosalind gives the sword a gentle shake, and Raymond comments that while it looks impressive, it's not the proper way to hold a sword. Charles remains silent, watching them. She picks up the knight's broadsword and asks if she may use it too, but he says no. Raymond tries to justify it, saying it's too heavy for someone like her. But the young woman surprises them by lifting a broadsword that should be held with both hands. Charles is astonished. Trying not to alarm Raymond, Charles awkwardly explains that during her recovery, Rosalind had worked on building her strength, which was why she could swing a broadsword so easily. She asks Charles what he's talking about, and he replies that her recovery is fantastic. The knight laughs, saying he remembers a time when Rosalind hit him so hard that he saw his grandfather calling him to the light. The young woman, with no social grace, asks why he didn't go with his grandfather. Raymond blushes, explaining that it would mean passing on to the next life. Clearing his throat, he asks that they drop the subject. Returning to the training, he says that he noticed she didn't yet seem ready to properly wield a sword, so he wasn't sure if it was time for her to return to the Order. Rosalind insists that she must return, for her greatest duty is to protect the master of the White Knights. Raymond laughs, saying he was worried about her, but feels relieved to see she hasn't forgotten the essence of the Order. With a determined look, he moves the sword through the air. He swings the blade right in front of the young woman's face, which sparks her serpentine gaze. Simulating a close combat stance, he tells Rosalind to watch carefully and try to remember those strikes. He tells her that all of this would be very important if what she truly wished was to protect the master of the White Knights. She watches attentively, wearing an enigmatic expression, and a magical aura seems to envelop her completely. At night, Charles tries to invite Sir Raymond to dinner, but he refuses, explaining that he must return soon, as he has many new responsibilities. Charles grows concerned for the night, noticing how weary he seems, to which Raymond replies that it has been a day full of unexpected events. Raymond shows a look of concern. That day, he had demonstrated his finest sword techniques. With great precision, he struck the air with his sword. Showing his strength, he skillfully handled the blade. And with mastery, he demonstrated how to deliver a final strike. Finally, he lets out a long sigh of relief, holding the long knight's sword. Already quite tired, he says he believes they've done enough for the day, and that it should be sufficient for Rosalind to restart her training. He recalls that the young woman had always been more talented with battle strategies and didn't want to tire her with heavy drills. However, she surprises him by saying she'd like to see more techniques. He takes up a combat stance, ready to demonstrate a higher level of sword strikes. The protagonist watches him intently. Night falls. Everyone is exhausted, yet Rosalind continues insisting on learning new combat moves. Raymond tells Charles that for weeks he will have recurring nightmares about all the training sessions packed into a single day at Rosalind's request. Not even when he was an apprentice did he fight that much in one day. Before leaving, he remembers one last detail. There will be a promotion ceremony for the White Knights in 2 weeks. And then he asks Charles to use that period to help Rosalind with vocabulary and etiquette for that kind of event. He explains that His Highness, the Prince, will preside over the ceremony, so it will be very formal. When he solemnly bestows the new title upon Rosalind, it would be absurd if she replied with something like, "Cool, man, thanks." To prevent this, Raymond asks Charles to help prepare her properly for the event's formality. The two men bid each other farewell, and Charles thanks Raymond for everything he had done for his sister, to which he replies that it was a pleasure, for she was a true friend. Sir Raymond hopes that the sword-fighting lessons might help her somehow, even if she had only watched that afternoon. Charles politely tells him not to worry about anything. When it came to learning new things, Rosalind's memory seemed remarkably sharp. Far away in the training fields, Rosalind slashes the air gracefully with her own sword. She wields the blade with a determined gaze, preparing to deliver a powerful strike. And finally, she executes a swing identical to the one Sir Raymond had shown her that very afternoon. The young woman pauses for a moment, gazing at the sword's blade and how it seemed to almost emanate a magical aura after the intense training. Standing there in the training fields, she observes the moon in silence, and the shadow within her remembers the promise she had made. Before departing, Rosalind had spoken with the Shadow Girl. Her only request had been that she protect the Master of the White Knights. Rosalind looks up at the sky, letting out a quiet sigh as she reflects on her mission. 2 weeks later, a new day begins in the Empire. More precisely, in the Imperial Palace, where the ceremony is about to take place. Inside, someone calls for Rosalind. Our protagonist bows politely before Sir Raymond, telling him it is an honor to see him again. He is surprised to see her behaving that way. And still bowed, the young woman asks if everything is all right with him. Sir Raymond assumes that Charles must have spent many sleepless nights training her for the occasion. He is touched by the young man's dedication and tells the noble lady that she doesn't need to be so formal with him. Raymond says he knows her new title will only be made official after the event, but he took the liberty of assigning her a private chamber. He takes the opportunity to finally present her with her new uniform, which, like his, bears the colors navy blue, white, and fine golden details. She begins to unbutton her shirt, but he interrupts her, telling her at least to wait until he leaves the room. Now dressed in her new uniform, Rosalind is ready for the ceremony in which she will rise in rank among the White Knights. Sir Raymond explains to her that first they must meet the Knight Commander so Rosalind can choose her apprentices, who will serve as her squires and learn new skills from her. As they walk, the man asks Rosalind if she has memorized the oath and is familiar with the procedures. She confidently replies that she has. Raymond curiously asks how she and Charles had decided to handle her memory loss. The young woman grows slightly embarrassed, thinking for a moment. Charles had been afraid that revealing the truth to the other knights might prevent his sister from getting good opportunities as a senior knight. On the other hand, he worried that her behavior, without context, could harm her reputation. He weighed the situation, imagining that in the best-case scenario, people would simply be confused, but in the worst case, it might raise suspicions. Then he had an idea. Stannis, the Knight Commander of the Order of the White Knights, had an older appearance, a stern and serious gaze, and red hair slicked back. The commander watches as Raymond introduces Rosalind, claiming that the young woman's condition would not affect her duties, since protecting the prince was imprinted in her very essence. Raymond hands over the doctor's letter, which confirmed that the young woman's condition was temporary. The commander takes the papers apprehensively. He looks around warily, uncertain whether Rosalind was truly ready to return to her duties as a knight. He asks if she is sure about this. Our protagonist, with a calm expression, replies that she has recovered well from her wounds and is ready to return to service. Raymond thinks that even the commander seemed uneasy about her return. Rosalind leaves the men to speak privately and walks out into the hall where the other knights of the order are gathered. She notices the murmurs among the men and looks at them seriously. Hearing them whispering unpleasant things about her, the young woman realizes that this was the hostility her brother had mentioned. She turns her attention away from the men, imagining that the Knight Commander himself probably harbored feelings of hostility toward her as well. Discreetly, she manages to catch a bit of the conversation between Raymond and the commander, hearing him say that what had happened to her was indeed a great misfortune, however. The commander had placed Rosalind under Raymond's responsibility so that he could help her reintegrate. Then, the shadow within her sees how much the young woman was admired by her peers. It seemed to her that Rosalind must have been a good person in life. The Grand Hall of the White Knights, the venue for the promotion ceremony, was adorned with the Order's purple banners, and everyone was preparing for the event. Cruel men whispered terrible things, such as how Rosalind hadn't attended the memorial for their comrades who had fallen during the hunting tournament. But she walked on fearlessly and steadily, striding across the Great Hall's carpet. Rosalind hears even harsher comments, claiming that she had used the influence of House Heatherwood since she was the Count's daughter. The shadow wonders how someone who seemed to have been such a good person in life could have had so many enemies. Raymond, seeing the situation, approaches and tells her that he is her only friend there. He tries to advise the young woman that, though she may have a good heart, that alone isn't enough for people to like her. But she declares that it makes no sense. He agrees and replies that not everything in life makes sense anyway. Raymond tells her not to worry about anything, because being his friend is better than having 1,000 friends. However, the shadow inside Rosalind's body cannot comprehend such a contradictory situation. As she walks among the other knights, she notices something. Something catches her attention so strongly that she can feel her heart beating faster. Not even the beautiful colors of the banners seem to stand out compared to him, the Prince of the Empire, the elegant man with long silver hair, the true master of the White Knights. His name was Richard, the eldest prince of the Ilibenian Empire. With beautiful blue eyes, dressed in noble white and blue garments with refined golden accents, he drew everyone's attention. The shadow realizes that this was the man Rosalind had asked her to protect before she passed away. Just a brief glimpse of the elegant man was enough to make the young woman's heart race. There, in that hall, surrounded by other knights, she watches him from a distance, deeply captivated by his appearance. The man with silver hair wears a serious expression. And now, the shadow inhabiting Rosalind's body must do everything she can to protect him from all evil. Richard walks absent-mindedly through the Great Hall, thin strands of his silver hair swaying around him. Rosalind touches her chest, unable to understand why her heart was beating so rapidly. She begins to wonder what that feeling is. What is happening? Had she been poisoned? But if the shadow is immune to poison, why does she feel so euphoric? Remembering Charles's explanations, he had told her that the prince's mother was the daughter of a rural viscount and a commoner woman. Because of this, many did not sympathize with Richard, questioning his legitimacy. But no one dared to challenge him. One of the reasons no one challenged him directly was that he possessed strong divine powers. And another was his beautiful appearance. His deep blue eyes, delicate face, and hair as silver as the moon. As he gazes upon the knights in the hall, Rosalind fully understands what Charles had told her. Standing in line among the other knights, our protagonist wonders if her heart was beating so fast merely because of his beauty. Finally, her name is called, and Rosalind of House Heatherwood must present herself before the prince so that he may grant her the newest honor. She steps out of line, her gaze distant, and walks toward the imperial throne. And then she walks toward Prince Richard. The noble prince looks at her with a serious expression, narrowing his eyes at the young woman. As she approaches him, our protagonist kneels on the ground, showing her respect for the prince. Prince Richard, standing beside the knight commander, asks her to declare her oath of loyalty. She declares her loyalty as Knight Rosalind of House Heatherwood before the prince, Lord of the Snowfields. Richard, the eldest prince of the Ilibenian Empire, accepts Rosalind's oath. The noble prince declares that she shall become the light that will destroy the Black Moon, and the young woman solemnly swears her allegiance to the Empire and to protect the weak. Lifting her head, she swears before the light of the Empire that she will offer her life in service as the prince's knight. Richard dips his finger into blessed water, proclaiming that he now bestows upon Rosalind the title of Royal Knight. He touches the young woman's hair, wishing that the grace of the gods will always be with her. Rosalind feels his touch upon her forehead, like a point of light radiating through her thoughts. She slowly opens her eyes and gazes at the imposing prince before her. He gives a brief nod of acknowledgement. Rosalind, still silent after the oath, looks at him with her deep green eyes. She returns to her place in line while the prince announces to everyone that he will choose a new aide for the vice commander. Our protagonist discreetly touches her own face, seeming lost in thought. She touches the exact spot where the noble prince had blessed her, and she remembers the way he had looked at her. Reflecting on that moment, Rosalind realizes how coldly he had observed her. Sometime later, in the office of the senior knights, Raymond apologizes, saying he knew they wouldn't give a major mission to a newly sworn knight, but he hadn't imagined they would sit her behind a desk and dump all the Empire's paperwork on her to handle. Raymond knew he had many new responsibilities, but he couldn't believe he would end up doing 2 jobs. The young woman grows discouraged, thinking that despite her brother's guidance and sword training, she couldn't remember how to deal with paperwork. Raymond tries to cheer her up, telling her she'll learn quickly. He then suggests she go to the training grounds to practice a bit while he handles everything. He says all this as he hands her a packet of cookies. She heads toward the training field, munching on the delicious biscuits. Upon arriving, Rosalind stops for a moment to take in the place. The knight begins to draw her sword, the blade gleaming in the afternoon sun. Suddenly, she realizes she isn't alone, as a few young men have approached her. Rosalind looks slightly surprised at the 2 men, who bow respectfully to her. One has brown hair, the other blonde. The blonde man congratulates Rosalind on her commendation, to which she shyly thanks him. He tells her he wishes he'd been informed about her promotion so he could have had time to prepare a gift for the occasion. Now, letting out a mocking laugh, he says that after all the time they trained together, Rosalind was the last person he would have thought would be promoted. The blonde man smirks arrogantly, thinking that if he had said such words to any other knight, he'd already be a dead man. He notices she shows no reaction at all, and her gaze seems empty to him. Of course, she must be better at strategy since she didn't seem too skilled in combat. The blonde man invites Rosalind to a sparring session. For old time's sake. Maybe she could teach them a thing or two. He's sure her promotion would be reconsidered once a younger knight defeated her in battle. Rosalind watches blankly as the blonde man politely asks her to accept, claiming it would be an honor to learn from someone like her. The young woman remembers that her brother had warned her about moments like this. Charles, doing his best to prepare her for uncomfortable situations, had told her that sometimes, out of envy, others might challenge her to a duel. And when that happened, she should give them exactly what they deserved, revealing her true strength in combat. Without much enthusiasm, she accepts the duel with the blonde man. Out in the training arena, younger knights watch as one of them announces that it's an official spar meant to test general combat ability. According to one of the boys, Ashton, the blonde, is one of the best swordsmen among them, and Rosalind will be chopped to bits. Another adds that since someone was called to officiate the match, it must be to get an important person's attention. Ashton listens with a smug grin as the red-haired boy acting as referee declares that the match won't end even if one fighter is disarmed. It will only end upon verbal surrender. Rosalind shows no trace of fear as she watches her opponent. The referee states that both have agreed to the rules and that no matter what happens, both sides will be absolved. The match begins and the overconfident Ashton lunges at Rosalind with full force, but he's caught off guard by the young woman's agility. Everyone gasps in disbelief. Ashton, his hand now slightly reddened, wonders what just happened. Rosalind had swiftly disarmed the blonde man, tossing his sword far away. She tells him that he'd asked her to teach him some new lessons. The blonde, pride-wounded, grows furious, insisting she just got lucky. Then he asks, "How about round 2? The knight agrees and quickly sheathes her sword. She throws the weapon behind her, far out of reach. Ashton stands frozen, stunned by her bold move. Rosalind takes a hand-to-hand combat stance, clenching her fists. The man can't understand how she'd suddenly grown so confident. After all, he's twice her size. He's got nothing to lose. But then why is he trembling so much? In a split second, Rosalind launches herself at him with a fierce look. She hurls the man clear across the arena, slamming him to the ground. While he groans in pain, the knight grabs his clothes tightly, lifting him slightly off the floor. With a threatening expression, Rosalind asks if he would like another lesson. Before he can answer, she furiously punches him right in the face. Far away, in the knight's office, Raymond is focused, organizing paperwork and making notes. Suddenly, he hears someone approaching. The vice commander enters the office, walking past Raymond without saying a word. The assistant asks the older man if there's anything he can help him with. The vice commander of the White Knights, Nathan, says he has made a decision regarding Rosalind Heatherwood. Leaving Raymond in shock, the man says he has decided to make her part of Prince Richard's personal guard. Raymond walks quickly, his elegant riding boots echoing through the palace corridors. Nathan tells him that he had been on his way to see the commander when he noticed a commotion in the training grounds. When he went to check, he saw Rosalind. Raymond had hoped she was just practicing, right? But no. She was beating the living daylights out of that arrogant trainee Ashton. Just imagining that scene gives Raymond chills. He wonders what had gone through her mind to do such a thing. As he walks heavily down the hall, he tries to understand how she could have managed to defeat someone like that when just a few weeks ago she could barely hold a sword. Suddenly, he bumps into Rosalind. The young woman patiently listens as he tells her he was just on his way to find her. But then he notices something else. Rosalind is holding a knocked-out Ashton in her arms. The young woman declares, "Glory to the Empire and down with the Black Moon." Raymond, completely confused, asks what Ashton is doing in her arms. How did this even happen? She calmly explains that they fought, and now she needs to take him to the infirmary. One of the boys explains that the two had agreed to fight until one surrendered. But before Ashton could say anything, Rosalind had covered him in punches. The boys confess that she had completely knocked him out, leaving Raymond deeply concerned. He realizes the moment feels oddly familiar, thinking back to the time she had overpowered him at Heatherwood Palace. He turns his attention to the young woman, asking if she's hurt, but she simply replies, "No, because he was too weak." Raymond asks her to please make sure Ashton doesn't hear her saying that. Okay? Finally, the man understands the vice commander's decision. Rosalind's place could never be behind a desk. Then he takes the opportunity to explain to her that next time someone challenges her to a training match, when the opponent is already down, she can stop hitting them, and she agrees. Sometime later, Raymond tells the vice commander that his decision was very wise, because Rosalind could silently stand by the prince's side, always alert to any threat. At that time in the Empire, the king and queen were siblings. The royal family constantly practiced such traditions to preserve their divine power. One of the princes, Stephen, was the son of the empress, descendant of the noble house of Lionmane. He had been born with immense divine power, far greater than his predecessors, because he came from a more noble lineage that made him the rightful crown prince. However, everything changed when the emperor had an affair with a woman outside the nobility. She was Melia, the daughter of a rural viscount, far too poor to be acknowledged by high society. But the young woman had two great blessings: her beautiful face and her long silver hair that shimmered like the moon. Yet she brought more than beauty into the imperial palace. She also brought her two children, born outside the imperial marriage, two living reminders of the emperor's nights of debauchery in the village. Though they were innocent, the existence of those children completely destabilized the imperial palace. The elder boy was recognized as the emperor's legitimate son, Richard, and was crowned prince shortly afterward. The coronation of this second prince, who was older than Stephen, was met with disapproval throughout imperial society. But when the young man demonstrated immense divine power, surpassing that of his half-brother, he became more accepted. From then on, the empire knew no peace. For once Richard was crowned, he gained powerful rivals. This led to a series of assassination attempts against Richard. As he grew more influential in the court, the attempts became increasingly blatant. Tragically, this resulted in the death of his younger sister, who became collateral damage in the feud between the two brothers. From that moment on, Richard began to seriously compete for the position of heir. This made Stephen even more power-hungry, driving him to join forces with the Kingdom of Balta, which led to a coordinated attack during a royal hunting tournament. Richard lets out a long sigh, displeased with Stephen's actions. The noble prince says that his half-brother had underestimated the strength of the White Knights, and because of that, he must be desperate. Perhaps he should have done far more than simply confine him within the Empire, shouldn't he? The blonde man, who appeared a bit older, was the Count of Seavale Manor. He hesitantly replied that such a suggestion was far too frightening. Richard responded that he was only joking, adding that they had suffered too many losses during the last festival, and that he had never wanted his knights to go through such a thing. Despite never having lived a peaceful life, that had been one of the worst nights of his existence. He remembered being hastily escorted by other knights, feeling like a coward for retreating instead of fighting alongside his men. The nobleman with silver hair blamed himself deeply for what had happened. However, Count Seavale tried to console him, telling him that those men had given their lives to save his. Covering his face in pure disgust, Richard declared that it was ridiculous. He never wanted anyone to sacrifice themselves for him, but a guard reminded him that his escort must be maintained, as the attacks against His Majesty were increasing. Richard knew that very well, for his half-brother was trying to poison him daily, and under the cover of night, sent assassins after him. That coward Stephen should have realized it was time for a strategic retreat. The Knight Commander called Richard's attention, telling him there was another matter they needed to discuss. Stannis told him he wanted to add Rosalind to the prince's personal guard, but before doing so, he wished to know what the noble thought of that idea. Richard's eyes narrowed upon hearing the name Rosalind Heatherwood. He remained silent for a few moments. He asked if Stannis was referring to the young woman he had just promoted that very morning. The Knight Commander confirmed that it was indeed her. With an ironic tone, the prince asked whether it would be wise to bring someone from House Heatherwood, sworn to Stephen, so close to him. But Rosalind was different. She had sworn loyalty to the White Knights and distanced herself from her father's schemes. Stannis handed the prince a stack of 12 letters of recommendation, which the vice commander himself had gathered in support of Rosalind. The man explained that he fully supported her appointment, and that if not for her surname, there would be no hesitation. The red-haired commander noted the prince's nervous reaction, saying that her family was the greatest obstacle to accepting her as part of his guard. Stannis wisely explained that they had far fewer knights after the tragedy. He admitted that while he trusted many of them with the sword, he didn't feel the same loyalty from them. He continued, saying he trusted the young Heatherwood far more than most of the knights in the order. Stannis told Richard that Rosalind was much smarter than he thought, as she had managed to defeat one of his best knights all on her own. Richard carefully read through the recommendation letters, which described the young knight's remarkable abilities. Seizing the opportunity, Raymond's father, the Marquis of House Ballion, cleared his throat to capture Richard's attention for a moment. He said that his son always praised her competence and loyalty, often telling him how Rosalind stood out among knights her age. He remembered Raymond telling him that not only her courage was exceptional, but also her kindness, diligence, confidence, and yes, especially her loyalty. Count Ballion confessed that Raymond spoke of her more like a proud grandfather than a fellow knight, surprising the prince. Richard listened cautiously as the Count told him how his son viewed Rosalind as a well-rounded knight, qualified in every attribute. The prince placed the letters on the table and recalled a long-buried memory, a much younger Rosalind telling him she would protect him at all costs. Then he remembered how she had nearly met her end on the day of the great tragedy. He had considered her foolish for not knowing her own limits. Richard reflected for a few moments, his anguish visible in his tightly clenched fists resting on the table. He hoped that by now she had learned that valuable lesson, but he also noticed that her eyes didn't seem to have changed at all. Richard declared that she could serve as a little bird to bring him information about Stephen. Now more optimistic, the prince decided to give her a chance and see what would happen next. Perhaps it would be a perfect opportunity to bring that connection to an end. Charles, being the good and worried brother he was, sent Rosalind a book about how to make new friends, and along with it, The Secret Ring of House Heatherwood. Raymond had gifted Rosalind a beautiful box filled with macarons. Our protagonist examined all the gifts with a deeply focused look. Raymond approached, asking what she was doing, to which she replied that she was looking for a gift to wish someone a good recovery. Then Raymond realized it was a gift for Ashton. However, he soon noticed that the items she was using were actually her own belongings. The young woman explained that the book had advised bringing flowers to someone who was ill, and that the gift should be something special. Raymond is touched by her kindness, willing to gift Ashton her macarons and even the family ring, both of which were very precious to her. However, he advises her not to give him the ring, so he doesn't think it's a marriage proposal. Ashton is delighted upon receiving the macarons, praising the gods. He thanks Rosalind for the flowers and such a delicate gift. However, he notices that the flowers must have been freshly picked from the garden, as there's dirt on his bedsheets. Raymond shoots him a deadly glare, silently ordering him to accept the gifts graciously. Rosalind steps closer to Ashton and asks how he's feeling. The young man says he feels much better and tells her not to worry about him. However, to his discomfort, the young woman, without thinking much, confesses that she wasn't worried about him at all. Raymond feels utterly mortified, thinking he should have given her better instructions before they went to the infirmary. Ashton becomes flustered by his opponent's blunt honesty and starts rambling incoherently. He wonders what on earth she's doing there. In an awkward attempt to fix the situation, he says that worrying too much is bad for one's sleep and begins to panic, wondering if he'll soon wither away like those flowers. Suddenly, Rosalind reaches out her hand toward him. She gazes intently at Ashton, holding his face firmly between her hands. Raymond is completely stunned by the sight, as Rosalind stares into Ashton's eyes, noticing the bruises on his face. Ashton lets out a small yelp, unable to contain himself, saying she's far too strong and he's far too weak. That's why he's covered in bruises. Rosalind then tells him he should be more careful. To his surprise, she gently brushes his forehead, moving the blonde strands away from his face. Gracefully, Rosalind says he doesn't need to worry anymore, because she'll take care of him. And she smiles sweetly. That completely catches Ashton off guard. The young man blushes furiously at Rosalind's tender words, unable to understand where such affection came from. Raymond watches the whole scene speechless. Little hearts seem to float around Ashton, who's utterly charmed by her gentleness, unaware that it's merely an empty gesture. Raymond has no idea what to do. Sometime later, as they walk around the palace grounds, Raymond asks Rosalind if she remembers their earlier conversation about squires. He reminds her that after her promotion to knight, she now has the right and duty to take in some apprentices and teach them. She nods. Raymond smiles as he explains that, at first, no one had volunteered to be her apprentice. However, after that scene in the training field, after the young men heard about her feats, several candidates appeared, and Raymond hands her a stack of applications for her to review carefully. He asks her to read them thoroughly, then turns to present the group of candidates waiting to meet her. Before them, several young knights stand lined up, anxiously awaiting her decision. They recite the knight's oath while wearing the colors of the White Knight's banner. Raymond greets them all, thanking them for showing up. Rosalind still seems shocked by the number of candidates. He takes the opportunity to tell her that this is her chance to see who's who, while she distractedly glances to the side. Rosalind hands the papers back to Raymond, as if ignoring everything he had just said moments earlier. The knight asks if she's not going to look at any of the files, but the young woman is already walking away from him. She stops in front of one of the young men, staring at him intently, which startles him at first. The young knight doesn't understand why Rosalind is staring at him like that. Finally, she gives up. The black-haired boy exhales in relief as she moves on down the line of young knights. She walks with determination past them without looking directly at anyone. Even the sound of her footsteps on the ground is enough to make them nervous. Suddenly, she stops before a young woman with short red hair staring at her in the same way. Rosalind asks Raymond if she has to choose 5 apprentices. He explains that 5 is the maximum. She can choose fewer if she wishes. She points to the red-haired girl, saying she's chosen her. Then she points to the first young man she had stared at earlier, choosing him as well. The young man can hardly believe it, feeling honored beyond words. Raymond is intrigued that she's chosen only 2 and flips through more of the candidates' files. The black-haired boy is Edward of House Rowfield, Eddie for short, and the red-haired girl is Mia of House Frostpike. Meanwhile, the young men who weren't chosen grumble among themselves, clearly unhappy with the selection. On the other hand, a few feel relieved not to have been picked, afraid of having to face Rosalind themselves. Raymond notices that it's as if Rosalind can see right through those apprentices. Yet what he still can't understand is why she chose only 2 of them. He orders the 2 to report to them immediately. The man explains to the 2 young knights that now, as squires sworn to Rosalind, they will move into new quarters and she will be their mentor and instructor from now on. The arrangement will continue until both are promoted to junior knights. Both Mia and Eddie are thrilled. Raymond thinks it's heartwarming to see young people so eager to serve for the first time, reminding him of when Rosalind had been his own squire. He remembers when Rosalind was much younger, with short hair, always proactive, swearing she'd do her best to help him. He pats Rosalind on the back, remembering how things were in the past, how clever she always was. Sometime later, inside the Imperial Palace, Rosalind presents herself before the prince to begin her duties in the royal guard. He listens to her without showing much interest. Adjusting his glasses, Prince Richard, calling her Little Rosie, repeats that there is no need for anyone to sacrifice themselves for him. He reads through the paperwork while the young woman watches, realizing he's just used a very old nickname. In a memory from the past, Charles once revealed that Rosalind hated being called Little Rosie. It was a childish pet name given by their mother. The present-day Rosalind is puzzled, trying to understand why the prince would call her that. Richard chuckles lightly and asks if Rosalind is even listening to him. It seems that Richard isn't particularly attached to Rosalind, and while a maid serves him tea, he mentions that Stannis told him she had memory issues. As they talk, the prince stirs his tea. Finishing the motion, he asks her what she knows and what she doesn't know. She replies, "Nothing." He's intrigued. How could she know nothing? As he begins to pour his tea, she explains that she suffered an almost total loss of memory. He notices how short and direct her answers are. Before taking a sip, Prince Richard remarks that he expects her to serve him well. He feels somewhat relieved, thinking there's nothing to worry about, and that he'll get rid of her soon enough. Suddenly, Rosalind abruptly grabs his hand, spilling the tea. He looks at her with a tormented expression, shocked by her rough gesture, stopping him from drinking. Behind them, the maid panics. Richard, furious, demands to know what she thinks she's doing. Our protagonist stares at him firmly, still holding his hand. Rosalind and the prince lock eyes, and behind them, everyone is astonished by her sudden and unexpected action. Calmly, she asks him not to drink the tea, saying she believes something was mixed into it. Rosalind's sharp perception leaves the prince speechless. He glares furiously at the maid who had just served him. Terrified by his piercing gaze, the maid shrinks back in fear. She stammers that she followed royal protocol. She had even tasted the tea before serving it to him. Besides, everyone knew the prince was immune to poison due to his divine powers, so it made no sense to try to poison him with a simple cup of tea. However, Rosalind notices something odd in her words and asks directly, if he weren't immune to poison, would she still have tried that trick? The question catches the maid completely off guard. The prince realizes that Rosalind has raised a valid point. What if someone had developed a poison so strong that even Richard's divine powers couldn't neutralize it? And Rosalind explains that this was precisely her suspicion. The other attendants say they'll take the maid away for questioning, but she starts to resist violently. Suddenly, she pulls out several knives, her expression turning wild, and prepares to attack. To everyone's shock, she lunges straight at the prince. Blades fly toward Richard. With incredible skill, Rosalind deflects the knives with her sword. Richard is stunned by her speed. Realizing he had severely underestimated her abilities, Rosalind charges at the maid, who is too terrified to react quickly. The young servant grabs a nearby tea set and tries to distract Rosalind by throwing it at her. Rosalind quickly analyzes the situation and changes tactics. She blocks the flying objects with precision. It's almost the perfect distraction. The maid is already rushing at the prince again, holding a small dagger. The blade nears Richard's face dangerously close. But before she can strike, something stops her. Rosalind lands a direct knee strike on the maid, preventing any harm from reaching the prince. Everyone watches in stunned silence as Rosalind takes down the attacker with her legs in a flawless, swift motion. Then, she grabs the maid by the uniform. Rosalind looks at the young woman with fierce determination in her eyes, holding a firm grip on her. And she lands a series of blows straight to the maid's face as everyone watches in shock. And in that instant, Richard realizes that Rosalind wouldn't even need a sword to annihilate an enemy if she wanted to. One of the men nearby shouts for Rosalind to stop, saying the maid has already been neutralized. Without saying a word, Rosalind turns to look at him, pausing the beating. Then she nods and calmly says that the woman hasn't been annihilated yet. Richard steps in, ordering Rosalind to keep the maid alive for questioning later. Everyone around them is completely stunned. Upon hearing the prince call her name, Rosalind straightens, her green eyes widening slightly in alertness. He tells her to leave the maid with his men and answer a few of his questions. The knight rises from the floor, releasing the unconscious servant, and walks toward Richard. He asks her how she knew the maid had poisoned his tea. Earlier that day, Shadow Rosalind had sensed something through her heightened sense of smell. She looked around with a serious expression, searching for the source of that scent. She watched closely as the maid calmly served the tea. Then she answers the prince, saying that she smelled blood. And though he can't quite understand how her sense of smell could be that sharp, he praises her perception. Beyond that, Rosalind had indeed seen the maid taste the tea, as royal protocol required, but immediately afterward, the young woman lifted her arm toward her face, turning her head slightly, and then spat the poison into the sleeve of her uniform, proving to Rosalind that she had only pretended to taste the tea. Richard was impressed by the girl's sharp vigilance, admitting he had clearly underestimated her. And without thinking, he grabs the same cup and begins to raise it. He says it's time they discover what was actually mixed in the tea. And Rosalind's eyes widen as she sees him implying he's about to drink from it. He brings the cup close to his lips. And once again, Rosalind surprises everyone, covering his face with her hand and spilling more of the tea. One of the men nearby yells at Rosalind, asking where her manners have gone, and demands that she release both the prince and the cup she's holding. Another man insists that she hand over the cup so they can examine the poison, while the other just panics uselessly. But chaos breaks out when the prince orders her not to give the cup to anyone and promises to forgive her for climbing on his table if she obeys him. Richard explains that if the poison in that tea is powerful enough to surpass divine powers, how could they possibly hope to detect anything? The men argue that even so, that's no reason for His Highness to taste the tea without understanding the strength of the venom. While they bicker, Rosalind studies the cup intently. The mystical eyes of the shadow within her search to uncover what had been mixed into the drink. Inside the cup, a deadly toxin had been infused with dark magic, making it nearly impossible to detect. She recognizes the same magic from the monsters she once fought in the forest. In the past, Charles had shown her several weapons forged with traces of dark magic. He told her those daggers had been found at the hunting tournament grounds and he'd kept them for safety. Then she explained that the poison wasn't in the weapons, but in the venom they'd been coated with. That explanation had left Charles deep in thought and very surprised. He reasoned that this happened because divine power and dark magic cancel each other out. Divine powers would be useless in a battle against poison created through dark magic. And that must have been why the Empire's priests couldn't heal the wounded. It was as if the neighboring empire had created a secret, highly lethal weapon. As Rosalind holds the cup, she concludes that this is the same substance their enemies used during the hunting tournament. Everyone freezes at her revelation. Richard asks her how she came to that conclusion. Before answering, she recalls Charles's warning not to reveal that she could sense magic. It would make her suspicious. So she needed another explanation. Rosalind thinks for a few moments before replying. She tells the prince she deduced it because dark magic and divine power neutralize each other. One of the men follows the same reasoning and realizes that the poison couldn't be detected or cured because of that. Richard agrees with them. In his thoughts, he feels a deep unease at the idea of a substance unaffected by divine power. Those divine powers were revered throughout the Empire, not only for protecting those born with them, but for healing those in need. But if someone had truly created a weapon that could overcome such power, then not even a prince blessed with divinity would be seen as invincible, nor capable of protecting his people. The authority of the imperial family would be completely nullified, and the faith in the Empire's gods would be utterly destroyed. Exactly what the Black Moon sought to achieve. Richard reflects for a few seconds, running a hand through his hair. He decides it's time to pay a visit to a certain witch. Behind thick iron bars, an enigmatic witch whispers something incomprehensible. Glaring at him with her glowing eyes, she hisses that the time has come. She lets out a wicked laugh, declaring that the Empire is finally about to meet its downfall. Far away, Eddie asks Mia if she's already heard what Lady Rosalind did. Mia says she's already heard. About the assassins, the poison, everything. Eddie remarks that Rosalind is truly skilled, and that if it weren't for her, something terrible might have happened to the prince. Mia says she heard Rosalind deflected every single knife before even taking down the attackers. She was amazing. More than that, there had been at least 8 assassins, and not one of them managed to lay a hand on her. Suddenly, their conversation is interrupted by Rosalind's arrival, leaving them both terribly embarrassed. The two immediately bow respectfully to the knight, greeting her in unison. Rosalind had just arrived, and she brought a surprise for them. She greets them with a serious look, holding wooden swords in her hands. Rosalind recalls that Raymond told her there were many ambitious apprentice knights eager to rise through the ranks of the order. He also told her that they needed to sharpen their swordsmanship if they hoped to advance. Mia and Eddie glance nervously at the wooden swords. Then, Rosalind hands the swords to Mia and Eddie, ready to test their skills before starting their training. The two young knights still seem a bit uncertain as they grip their weapons. However, despite her lack of experience, Mia looks determined. And beside her, Eddie, though nervous, seems fully committed. Both of them are tense after hearing about Rosalind's feats, knowing she had defeated countless opponents with ease. Eddie tries to focus, though he can't help but think about how she managed to knock out so many men in a single day. Rosalind watches them silently, completely focused on evaluating them. To her, the two of them look like baby deer, innocent and defenseless, as if afraid of her. There in the training arena, they tremble like leaves in the wind, clutching their wooden swords. She thinks to herself that they are even more naive than baby deer, for at least animals know when they're in danger. If they keep this up, they could seriously hurt themselves. Finally, Rosalind ends the test and declares that she's seen enough for the day. The two youngsters look terribly nervous, unsure whether they did well or not. Rosalind tells them with a grave expression that they did very, very poorly. Looking at them, she sees 2 baby deer completely crushed by defeat. The knight lets out a small sigh. Then she declares that, from that moment on, she'll start attacking them both. Mia and Eddie stare at her, confused, still disoriented from the physical strain. Rosalind gazes at them with an intimidating look and says that, from now on, from the moment they wake up until the moment they go to sleep, she might attack them at any time. The 2 are horrified, thinking this must be an incredibly difficult and terrifying training method. The young apprentices are terrified, wondering if she intends to annihilate them. Far away, gas lamps flicker through the darkness. Prince Richard, his assistant, and a soldier descend a long staircase leading into the shadowy dungeons of the palace. The brown-haired assistant raises his hand in concern, asking the prince why he needs to come down here personally. The others remain silent. Finally, Richard replies that he doesn't intend to wait months for answers to his pressing questions, which clearly unsettles the young man. The assistant gives a nervous smile, realizing the prince is far too impatient for his own good. He hears eerie voices calling to them in the darkness. The prince walks forward seriously, unfazed by the ghostly whispers. He notices that the solitary cell lies deeper than the rest of the dungeons. The young assistant grows increasingly uneasy, especially knowing the prince is about to face such a dangerous prisoner confined here. The soldier bangs his sword against the thick bars, and behind them stands a mysterious woman. Richard steps forward boldly toward the prisoner. The woman, in terrible condition, begins making strange sounds. She moves within the cell, the chains around her clanking metallically. Suddenly, she grabs one of the iron bars, revealing sharp, claw-like nails. The woman, more beast than human, stares at the prince with eerie white eyes and hisses that such a scent could only belong to someone with divine power. Richard tells the woman he came down here to see her. She was once the slave of Korean Manhwa. He asks, with a hint of irony, if she's enjoying her stay. The terrifying woman says he must be Prince Richard. She can tell by that dreadful smell. Suddenly, she tries to grab him, forcing her hands with long claws through the bars. The prince's assistant panics, but Richard tells him to stay calm, saying she has a terrible habit of doing things like that. With a wicked smile, the woman tries to provoke him, asking if his brother Stephen had fought with him again. What a baby. Was that why he had come here? As he pulls a mysterious vial from beneath his cloak, Richard remarks that she still knows how to get on people's nerves. He hands her the small vial containing a strange liquid. The woman looks at the vial, swirling the contents slightly. He says it's a gift for her, and at last we learn that the woman's name is Karen. She opens the small vial. From the smell, she deduces it's a tea brewed with the bitter leaves of the Lienta region. She says Richard has refined taste. The prince replies that she knows her own potions well. She brings the vial closer to her face, analyzing it carefully. Surprised by what else she detects within the liquid, Karen bursts into laughter from her great discovery. Richard realizes she must have recognized the poison infused in it. She's a powerful witch, capable of detecting even the faintest traces of magic. After assessing the situation, the prince understands that Rosalind had been right about everything. Cackling darkly, Karen says the light of the Empire fades more each day, and that they don't stand a chance against what has been created. The sorceress claims that with this new gift from the darkness, absolute chaos will reign, something the people of the Empire have never seen before. Richard impatiently asks if she's finished. It's hard to think when she tends to ramble so much. Annoyed by the interruption, she finally reveals that there is dark magic in the poison. The prince thanks her for the short version. He turns to leave, saying they're done here, but the witch keeps muttering nonsense from inside her cell. He walks away, trying not to listen to the evil prophecies she continues to chant. At last, Karen shouts that he can resist all he wants. It will all be useless. Once again, gripping the prison bars, she hisses, asking if he'll be able to resist the darkness. For a moment, Richard turns back after hearing her words, but his assistant insists that they leave immediately. That night, on his balcony, the prince reflects on the question the witch had asked in the dungeon. Could he truly bring back the White Knight with only the god's presence? Troubled by the thought, he stares at the wine in his delicate glass. As the drink shimmers under the moonlight, he reflects on the White Knight. He recalls the Black Moon and the White Knight, once powerful beliefs within the Empire, now nothing more than children's fairy tales. On the day the divine powers of the Goddess of Light reached their peak, the God of Darkness emerged from the shadows of the night. A white light of blessings, brighter than any other light, enveloped the world. It blessed the earth with the gift of life, driving the dark powers to the far corners of the heavens. Thus began the era of the White Night. Driven away from the light, Crayon Tidanian, the goddess of darkness, took refuge in the moon, which became darkened by her presence. And there she waited for the right time. Only a few members of the royal family knew the truth of the White Night. What could Karen possibly know to have said such things? Then, something rustles in the bushes, catching Richard's attention. And suddenly, something startles him, leaving him frozen in place. Landing skillfully on the balcony, Rosalind emerges from the foliage. Richard demands to know what she's doing there. She simply replies that she's standing guard at the palace. The prince finds that strange, since her shift was only during the day. The young woman begins pulling something rather odd and says to him that he looks down in disgust at what she's thrown on the floor. Rosalind finishes her sentence, explaining that assassins don't care what time her shift is. Still stunned by Rosalind's quick thinking, the Imperial soldiers drag the captured assassin down to the dungeons. As they listen to the men walk away, Richard and Rosalind overhear them whispering, wondering what she was doing there at such an hour. Richard's expression turns serious and hesitant. Then he calls for Rosalind. Now we see the prince's royal chambers. The man swirls a delicate glass of wine in his hand. He invites Rosalind to sit, thinking how interesting the shift in their dynamic has become. Nothing like one day after another. Richard elegantly pours her a glass of wine and offers it to her. At first, she refused, but he insists that she try it. When their hands touched, the prince felt something different. Rosalind looks at the drink with slight curiosity, swirling the wine gently. Richard finds it peculiar how relaxed she seems, drinking wine with a prince in the royal chambers in the middle of the night. He tries to push those thoughts away and pours a little more into her glass. The prince carefully sets his own glass down on the table. Then something catches Rosalind's attention. Suddenly, and with a bit more force than intended, the young woman clinks her glass against the prince's. He's startled by the gesture, watching as the delicate glasses tremble under her strength. Richard is intrigued, wondering how she could so casually toast glasses with a prince. Such a formal act. She remembers her brother, who had unintentionally forgotten to teach her certain rules of etiquette. But she's quite proud of her toast, and the wine sits well with her. Richard thinks that her boldness is still better than her climbing on his table. The man reflects on how amnesia can change a person's life. He notices clearly how her demeanor has changed, though she still wears the same expression she had on the day of her promotion. Rosalind's deep green eyes shine like emeralds, yet they carry a quiet sadness. In the past, Richard had ordered Rosalind to stay away from him. Furious, he hurled things aside, shattering several objects nearby. He demanded to know what she was doing there. Humbly, Rosalind knelt on the floor and said she was there to protect him. With tears in her eyes, she said she would protect him forever. It was a promise. He looked at her with both pain and disgust. Richard's face twisted in anger, his teeth clenched. Consumed by rage, he shouted, "Who did she think she was to protect him, when she couldn't even protect her own little sister?" Kneeling, Rosalind didn't react at all. Back in the present, the prince silently stares at his reflection in the wine. After so many years, there she is again. In the same room with the same man who once expelled her from the Order of Knights. Ah, the wonders of memory loss. The two remain quiet for a moment, gazing at their wine. He keeps wondering how she can still have the same eyes from all those years ago. And how could she still be so determined to protect him after everything they had been through? After several bottles of wine, he finally gives up, collapsing onto the table and asking how she isn't drunk yet. Rosalind stands and looks at the prince, now unconscious. Carefully, she lifts the man into her arms. Laying Richard on the bed, he lets out a few sleepy groans. She covers him with a blanket and steps away, letting him rest in his dreams. Before she can leave completely, she hears him murmur something. He asks her why she insists on staying by his side. But before she can answer, the prince is already far away, lost in the realm of dreams. Without saying a word, Rosalind watches him sleep for a moment. The shadow within her remembers the promise she made before Rosalind passed away. Then, she softly tells the sleeping prince that she had promised to protect him. Far away, in another palace, a vase shatters against the floor, and someone can be heard shouting insults. Stephen covers his face with one hand. The young blonde man is having a fit, repeating the words, "poison infused with dark magic." His gaze is terrifying. He yells at the men around him, demanding to know what they've been doing while someone else plots the complete downfall of the empire. A gray-haired man explains that they can't undo what has already happened. He tells Stephen that they've suspected for some time that Prince Hakab was scheming something, and the blonde prince shouts that they failed to predict it. A poison that can't be neutralized even by divine powers puts Stephen himself at risk. Those bastards are just waiting for the right moment to strike. The gray-haired man continues, saying Hakab hasn't broken their secret alliance yet, so perhaps there's something he wants in return. Maybe a deal. Stephen listens patiently as the man suggests that if a poison was created, then maybe they're also developing an antidote. They've discovered that Balta has been trying to recreate the Night of Blessings on its own for quite some time. So possibly the information they have about the White Knight could be of great value to Balta. Stephen asks if he understood correctly. Those files are hidden in secret archives that only the Emperor can access, and this man wants to hand them over to the enemy? The man argues that they've kept that information for years and have never done anything with it. How could Balta possibly succeed where the Empire hasn't? Stephen admits that the man makes a valid point. He knows he must keep Richard distracted while he negotiates with Hakab about creating an antidote. With a cunning smile, Stephen tells the man that, luckily for them, he has an ace up his sleeve. There was no longer any need to hide. He orders that Diego be brought to him. The young prince was a blonde boy, surrounded by thorns and spiderwebs. As soon as the sun rose, Stephen would have a conversation with his father. He was determined to eliminate Richard once and for all. Early in the morning, the prince's assistant, we'll call him Paul, heads to the royal chambers. He knocks on the door and enters the prince's room, greeting him with a good morning, and immediately he freezes at the sight before him. The floor is wet, covered with dark stains. Paul panics, thinking another assassin must have entered the palace and that a tragedy had occurred. He bolts forward and accidentally kicks a bottle on the floor. Seeing the wine bottle roll across the carpet, he pauses for a moment. Then, Paul takes a closer look and realizes there was no assassin at all. Just a night of heavy drinking. The morning sun shines through the grand hallways. While Richard suffers from the worst hangover imaginable, Paul mutters that the prince must have drunk far too much last night. Paul can't comprehend how the prince managed to empty so many bottles seemingly by himself. But Richard reveals that he wasn't drinking alone. He wonders when Rosalind had left. The previous night, before he passed out from the wine, he barely remembers her saying something to him. Soon after, the young woman had turned and walked away, but he can't recall what she said. Paul calls Richard's attention, and in the brief moment he's distracted, his brother Stephen appears, staring at him with disdain. The assistants exchange polite bows, but the brothers do not bow to one another. Richard returns the same look of contempt to his brother, though he's slightly confused as to what Stephen is doing there in his palace. The Emperor lets out a long sigh, asking what sort of poison they're talking about, saying that's the last thing he wants to hear. Richard argues that it's too late to sweep the matter under the rug, since many had already perished at the hands of the Black Moon. He continues, warning that soon many will start questioning why such a poison cannot be neutralized by divine powers. With a dangerous look, the Emperor grabs a map, and after making a grave decision, begins to reveal it to his sons. While tearing the map apart, he declares that the best solution would be to destroy the Kingdom of Balta once and for all. Richard realizes that his father's thirst for vengeance stems from his own lack of control. By starting a war, he would jeopardize the family's standing across the entire empire. Stephen then suggests that they simply wait and let things unfold, and only after that, take action. That way, they could analyze Balta's moves over time. Richard wonders what his cruel brother is plotting. With a sly smile, Stephen then says they could send a messenger. The silver-haired prince finds the idea far too risky, judging by his troubled expression. Stephen explains that it would be a great opportunity to display authority before the Empire, since his brother Richard had been so skilled in handling the Black Moon fanatics. If he sends a messenger to Balta, they'll feel threatened. Richard listens to the absurd plan with a serious expression. So, that was his brother's scheme. Touching the map, the Emperor reminds them that they've had 2 years of peace without sending a single envoy to Balta. He declares that it's time to put pressure on those barbarians. Standing abruptly, Richard asks his father what they'll do about all the traps laid along the border. Isn't this far too dangerous a time? The Emperor interrupts him, forcing the prince into silence. He tells his son that the divine glory that blesses the Empire can never be diminished by a mere poison. With a proud, imperious gaze, the ruthless Emperor orders Richard to travel to the Kingdom of Balta. and may the gods light his path. Richard can hardly believe such a ridiculous command from his own father. He knows full well that both the Emperor and his brother are merciless, heartless men who care only for chaos and destruction. Richard despises being caught in such a situation. Yet, keeping a composed demeanor, he bows respectfully and says he will do as His Majesty commands. The door closes behind him with a creak. Paul insists that this mission is clearly a trap. The prince admits he's well aware of the danger. He remembers bitterly that the last attempt on his life had been during the hunting tournament, not so long ago. The Emperor had no qualms about throwing his son into peril. Richard recalls Rosalind long ago telling him that she would do anything to protect him. The prince reflects that perhaps her vows are in vain, for he is already tired of prolonging all this. And so, he departs for the Moonstone Palace. Later that same day, Rosalind, Mia, and Eddie overhear some people talking about Prince Richard taking a messenger to the kingdom of Balta. The servants are anxious, for even they know well the great risks of such a mission, especially because of the Black Moon. Rosalind hears them whisper that the Emperor is throwing his son to the wolves. Mia and Eddie glance nervously at Rosalind. Mia breaks the silence and says that everyone is trying to remain calm about it, but the Order can't do anything. The young woman asks Rosalind what will become of them once she departs for Balta with the prince. Suddenly, Rosalind unsheathes her sword and turns toward them. Mia barely manages to block the strike. Then Rosalind goes for Eddie. He's more prepared this time, though still struggles to block her blow. Once more, Rosalind attacks both apprentices, and together they manage, with great effort, to block her strike. She looks at them calmly, but doesn't lower her sword. Then she sheathes it and reminds them that she had warned she could attack at any time. She's pleased with their defense, but says they must strengthen their power. The knight orders them to focus on training their strength while she is away. Then she hears a sound that catches her attention. Golden coins gleam in the sunlight as they're carried in wooden chests. Carriages and men transport several boxes filled with gold. Rosalind gets distracted from Mia and Eddie for a moment as they ask why so many carriages are there. A coin rolls across the ground, stopping at Rosalind's boots. She kneels to pick it up. A blonde young man dressed in red approaches her, catching her by surprise. He reaches for the coin at the same time she does. Their hands brush lightly in a delicate motion. The young man explains that those coins are gifts for the Prince of Balta. Rosalind looks at him, fascinated. With a bright smile, he says it's been a long time since they've seen each other. He greets her politely, but Rosalind is speechless before him. Behind her, she notices Mia and Eddie bowing deeply in reverence. The young man then invites her to take a short walk with him. Admiring the cherry trees, he happily remarks how beautifully they're blooming. Rosalind realizes that this young man is Diego, one of the Empire's princes. Yet the shadow within her has no memory of who he is to Rosalind. The young man gazes at the cherry blossoms as petals drift through the air. He turns to her, his golden hair and amber eyes shining under the light. Diego says with cheerful warmth that he's glad to see her well, for he was deeply worried after hearing about her accident. Rosalind thanks him for his kindness. He tells her he heard she joined Richard's personal guard and will soon be traveling to Balta. She nods in confirmation. A bit shyly, the young prince admits he's happy she'll be joining the expedition since he doesn't know anyone else going. She asks if he too is going to Balta, and he confirms, saying he's met Prince Hakab a few times but only briefly. In the garden, a gentle breeze carries the falling petals. Diego steps closer to Rosalind, but she doesn't move. He begins to say there's something he'd like to reaffirm. He confesses how worried he's been about her all this time, his amber eyes shining with emotion. The shadow within her notices he's stopped calling her Lady. Could that mean they were close once? Then, a delicate petal falls onto Rosalind's nose. Diego chuckles softly at the sight. He reaches out and gently brushes the petal from her face, his fingers grazing her skin, freezing her in place. She's caught off guard, not knowing how to react. She thanks him, but her indifferent tone surprises him. The young prince laughs awkwardly, a bit embarrassed. He releases the petal and tells Rosalind he's heard about her memory loss, asking if she remembers anything about him. Sadly, she shakes her head. A bit saddened, he understands he can't expect too much. As butterflies flutter through the garden, he says that Raymond told him that on that fateful night, she fell off the cliff. Rosalind thinks to herself that Raymond always talked too much. Diego confides that when the ambush began, he went searching for her, but in vain. He never imagined she could have wandered so far from the camp. Rosalind asks if the cliff was really that far away. He tells her it was far to the north, in the opposite direction. That's why it was so difficult to find her. Diego asks for her forgiveness for not being able to find her that terrible day. He says he wished he could have visited her sooner, but he couldn't. He smiles again, truly happy to see her well. Though her expression remains calm and distant, she notices how cheerful and gentle he is. She tries to smile back, thinking perhaps it will please him. And then Rosalind gives him a beautiful smile, thanking him for worrying about her. His golden eyes widen at her gratitude. He blushes deeply, clearly not expecting that reaction from her. Suddenly, he begins to stammer, saying that he'll see her again when they depart for Balta. And in his haste, he waves goodbye awkwardly before leaving. Rosalind stands in silence in the garden, watching him go. Her gaze is quietly melancholic. She remembers Raymond telling her he had no memory of seeing her before the ambush began. He had explained that everything was so chaotic. Perhaps that's why he hadn't noticed her absence. Though Rosalind doesn't think much about what Raymond says, the prince's story confirms her suspicions. Despite their search, Rosalind hadn't been at the camp when the ambush started. The shadow recalls that the first thing she did after sealing the pact was to heal Rosalind's body, for she was gravely wounded. Among those injuries, there was a strange, deep cut on her back, so severe that even if she survived, it would be hard to recover from. Apparently, Rosalind had disappeared from the camp long before the ambush. She was found at the bottom of a ravine, far from the camp, with that deep wound across her back. The shadow, now in the form of a girl, wonders if someone else might have attacked her. Something powerful and ferocious must have struck Rosalind to cause such an injury. Back in the present, Charles strolls idly through the garden. He's suddenly startled when his sister, or rather her shadow, calls his name. He turns to her with great joy. His green eyes shine in surprise. Rosalind runs to him and gives him a big hug. She smiles sincerely. Charles is delighted to see her smiling more naturally. For a moment, she looks just like the Rosalind he once knew. He hugs her back tightly, patting her gently on the back. The young man takes the chance to ask if she's been well, and she answers that she has. He notes she seems more lively. Perhaps her social skills have improved. However, Rosalind has chosen not to tell him that she knocked out one of the knights, nor that she drank several bottles of wine with the prince. It's better that way. He had been worried she might get into trouble, but it seems she's handling things quite well. Charles asks if she shouldn't be tending to Prince Richard right now, but she reveals she has the day off. The prince told her to spend a little time with family before the grim mission ahead. Charles feels relieved that his sister got some rest, and she opens a bag full of sweets. A gift from him. He admits he's been quite worried since the Prince of Balta clearly has ties to the Black Moon. He warns her to be suspicious of everyone there, as they're all enemies of His Highness. While eating a sweet, she promises she'll do that. Charles explains that Balta is a closed kingdom, and there's still much unknown about its people and customs. And for that reason, suddenly Rosalind stops eating and listens intently to something she's heard. She tosses the bag back at Charles, catching him off guard. The young man shouts after her, asking where she's going, but she's already dashing away. As the sun sets, Rosalind looks toward the palace walls. Charles realizes there must be something dangerous beyond them. Rosalind, her eyes narrowing like a serpent's, prepares to strike. Worried, Charles asks if there's something on the other side. Rosalind crouches low, hiding in the tall grass. Then, with astonishing agility, she leaps, landing atop the wall. Charles calls her name, but it's useless. Before he can shout again, she's already jumped to the other side. He hears shouts and noises, but can't tell what's happening. So he runs toward the nearest gate. Opening it, he demands to know what's going on, and finds Rosalind knocking out two young knights. Misreading the situation completely, he assumes she's attacking people for food. Charles runs toward her, offering her food in a desperate attempt to make her stop attacking the young knights. Rosalind glances at her brother, who's waving the same bag of sweets from inside the palace gates. Stealthily, Mia gets up after taking quite a beating. Seeing Rosalind distracted, the girl seizes the chance to flee, sprinting away at full speed. Eddie is still completely unconscious on the ground, but she can't escape Rosalind's piercing gaze. Even from afar, Rosalind throws her sword. It strikes the ground right in front of Mia. The girl shivers, imagining what would have happened if she hadn't dodged in time. She collapses to the ground, gasping after the shock, as Rosalind walks calmly toward her. The knight bends down to retrieve her sword, and it feels as if Mia's very soul has left her body. Rosalind tells her and Eddie that once again they failed the test. She explains that they should have heard her climbing the wall, to which Mia responds that they did hear something but didn't know what it was. Rosalind reasons that since she was climbing, the sound must have been louder than usual. Charles arrives just as she's lecturing the young knights on how to detect the sounds of possible enemies and orders them to intensify their training. He smiles in relief, seeing no one is in actual danger. A while later, the siblings continue their walk through the garden, and Rosalind mentions that Raymond gave her a bunch of delicious sweets. Charles is pleased to hear that. He remarks that he loves macarons, which makes her very happy. Charles notices the change in her and feels glad to see her well. She no longer has that rigid, distant look as if trapped in her own thoughts. With a bright smile, Rosalind even confesses she beat up a knight, just like Charles had supposedly told her to. Charles knows he never said such a thing, but he listens quietly as his sister proudly explains she even visited the poor man in the infirmary afterward. The sun sets, bathing a garden gazebo in golden light. A soft breeze stirs the leaves of the trees. Rosalind picks up a teacup from the table and begins telling her brother that the first time she saw His Majesty, her heart had raced wildly, making Charles spit out his tea in shock. She recalls the prince's serious expression and how her heart had pounded like a frightened rabbit's on the day of the knight's promotion. She can't quite understand why she felt that way. It was something peculiar. Now Charles is a bit embarrassed, unsure how to respond. He tries to change the subject, joking that his heart also races when he sees His Majesty, though in a very different way. Rosalind looks startled by that remark. Charles clears his throat, steering the conversation back on track. As he mentioned earlier, he's deeply worried about her upcoming expedition to Balta. Rosalind listens attentively. Her brother can't shake the feeling of anxiety since she survived the cliff accident. He knows she'll always be exposed to danger, no matter where she is. Rosalind calls his name after noticing he's lost in thought. He imagines himself begging her to stay with her family. He's already lost his sister once. Does she really need to live such a perilous life? But he knows that, despite coming there to dissuade her, this is the life she chose. Then Charles looks at her. Seeing how happy she is with her apprentices, how much they adore her, something in him changes. Despite the dangers ahead, Rosalind looks genuinely content with her new life. He simply asks her to come back home safe when it's all over. Charles lovingly promises to cook all her favorite dishes when she returns. She winks and promises to come back in one piece. Rosalind pats her brother's head, calling him a good boy. He remembers how much he's always admired her unwavering dedication to her convictions, and he doesn't want to stand in her way. It's time for Rosalind to return to the prince's guard. She asks if he'd like to say goodbye to Richard, but Charles refuses immediately. That night, heavy rain pours through the forest. Rosalind dashes through the woods, brushing past branches and dense foliage. As she runs desperately, only one thought fills her mind. She has to tell him. She stops abruptly, raising her lantern to light the darkness around her. She must tell him about what she witnessed. There's no time to waste. Rosalind's heart pounds as rain drenches her armor. The young woman keeps running through the storm, her metal armor slicing through the wet grass. Haunted by what she saw, she knows she must protect him at all costs. Suddenly, she steps on a slick stone and finds herself at the edge of a massive cliff. She was deeply shaken, trying to think how she could escape that dead end. Suddenly, a sharp pain sears across her back, forcing her to her knees. When she turns around, her soaked cape is covered in red stains. The determined young woman knows she can't waste time. She must return and find the camp. Then, a massive explosion erupts behind the trees, startling her. She wonders if they've already caught up to her. But before she can react, the rocks beneath her crumble, and she slips over the cliff's edge. And so, Rosalind fell to her fate. That night marked the beginning of our heroine's story. The shadow inside Rosalind's body awakens, startled by the surge of memories. Rosalind hides among the leaves, panting and enraged. She wonders if those were Rosalind's final memories in life. That night, the girl could never have imagined she would meet her destiny. Could she have known beneath that storm how precious those memories would become? Rosalind, even just a shadow of her former self, weeps as she envisions the girl's life. Sometime later in the Empire, it's time for celebration. Crowds have gathered for the occasion. The Grand Palace, shining under daylight, is filled with people. Along the imperial city streets, a procession of knights marches toward the kingdom of Balta. Rosalind, in her gleaming armor, remains alert for any suspicious movement in the crowd. The townspeople cheer for the knights and Prince Richard's convoy, wishing him success on his journey. Far away, someone grips a wine glass tightly. Stephen watches the people celebrating Richard's expedition with disdain, wondering what on earth they're thinking. He mutters that his brother is such an arrogant bore, even when leaving. Moments earlier, he had falsely wished his brother a good adventure, knowing Richard could see through his lies. Richard, with a sly smile, had said he was determined to bring back all the proof needed to show the poison came from Balta. Stephen throws the glass to the floor, spilling the wine everywhere. Furious, he curses his brother. That insolent worm. He turns to leave, telling his aide there can be no mistakes this time. None of it would matter if Richard returned alive. Stephen gives the man a wicked glare and orders him to follow instructions at any cost. He wants to see that arrogant smile wiped from his brother's face. Meanwhile, Richard travels with confidence. Though he finds the mission absurd, he believes it could yield valuable results. The knights set up camp deep in the forest. One of them remarks to the prince that he's glad the weather is holding, since the rain might delay their plans. Richard is pleased. That means they can make faster progress. But their journey so far seems too peaceful. Something makes the prince uneasy. He's sure Stephen must have planted assassins or traps along the road from the capital. Yet nothing has happened, and they've nearly reached the border. It isn't like Stephen to stay quiet or act cautiously. Richard suspects the real battle will begin on their return trip. For whatever reason, he's relieved nothing serious has happened yet. Then Paul calls the prince over for a moment. The knight advises him to stay hydrated even in the forest, since Balta's air is dry and thin. Richard worries if they have enough water to continue, but Paul explains that Rosalind found a nearby stream. He asks if it's drinkable. They can't afford to fall ill. Though skeptical, Paul tells him Rosalind said the stones filtered it clean enough to drink. Richard wonders how a lady of noble birth would know such a thing. He supposes she must have learned a few tricks during her night training, though finding a fresh source so quickly seems unlikely. Suddenly, some men's chatter interrupts his thoughts, and both he and Paul turn toward the commotion. Rosalind has caught a few rabbits for their supper. Richard and Paul are speechless. One of the hunters says that in 30 years of hunting, he's never seen anyone like her. Richard demands to know what's going on. Calmly, she replies that she's caught 3 rabbits for dinner. He waves her away, saying the smell is unbearable, scolding her that wasn't what he meant. He wants to know why she felt the need to hunt. Suddenly, she pushes the little animals toward him, leaving Richard frozen. Proudly, Rosalind declares that she hunted them for him. The rabbits, freshly killed, still damp with warmth, make Richard go pale with horror. Then, something unexpected happens. Richard lets out a loud scream and faints, startling everyone around and sending birds flying into the sky. Raymond scolds Rosalind, telling her she should be more careful around the prince. The young woman doesn't understand the reprimand. Innocently, she thought fresh meat was much better than dried food. Although he agrees with her, he knows what she did was wrong. Soon after, Raymond asks the prince to forgive her behavior, assuring him he'll keep an eye on her. Now dressed in clean clothes, Richard says that won't be necessary. The prince is pleased that the camp is fully set up and suggests they hold a small hunting competition. Someone comments that it's a great idea, but Rosalind looks utterly downcast after being scolded. Richard looks at her seriously. Then he decides to ask that the rabbits be prepared for him to eat. That immediately brightens Rosalind's mood. She beams with joy. Out in the forest, Rosalind moves with agility, taking long leaps. She grips a tree branch skillfully, her expression focused. Gracefully, she climbs up the branch to observe the forest animals. She scans the area attentively, searching for any sign of a creature she could hunt. Rosalind lifts her face to look farther ahead. She realizes she hasn't had that dream again. The one where she recovers Rosalind's past memories. It had truly frightened her. But no matter how hard she tries, she can't remember anything before that. She recalls flashes of the girl with the lantern in the forest, and the shadow desperately wishes she could discover what that girl had seen that night. Then, Rosalind allows herself to get distracted for a moment. Suddenly, she hears the sounds of a doe nearby. She prepares to approach it. Earlier that day, one of the hunters had taught her how they use specific kinds of traps for different types of animals. She jumps down from the tree, her hair flowing in the wind. She lands gracefully on the ground, barely feeling the impact. She walks toward the place where the doe seems to be calling from. Immediately, she senses the presence of dark magic. A faint black mist swirls in the air, putting her completely on alert. There, in the forest, someone or something had left a strong trace of dark magic. And then she comes face to face with a young doe. She freezes, realizing something dangerous about it. The small animal is wrapped in dark magic. Its large, expressive eyes look straight at her. Rosalind can almost see her reflection in them. She knows that kind of energy all too well. The young woman gazes at the creature with her deep green eyes. That doe is, in truth, a shadow like her, pretending to be a wounded animal to draw in its victims. Suddenly, she hears the voices of other knights approaching. She knows that if they see the doe, they'll try to kill it immediately, and a tragedy could occur. Among them is Ashton, the knight she had knocked out on her first day in the order, and all he had managed to catch this time was a tiny frog. She crouches down to speak softly to the shadow animal and tells it to escape as fast as it can. The doe gives her a wary look, as if suspecting she might chase after it. Rosalind extends her hand toward it, and the creature flinches in fear. She reveals herself to it as a shadow. Showing her powers, she urges it to trust her and flee before the men arrive. The doe looks at her with its wide eyes, saying nothing. Rosalind watches as it vanishes in broad daylight. The shadows dance with the wind. Then the shadow takes the form of a small, friendly-looking squirrel. The squirrel scurries off into the forest, hiding among the leaves. Rosalind watches the little creature disappear into the distance. She reflects for a moment, realizing that in all her millennia of existence, she has never encountered others of her own kind. She sees the squirrel quickly climb a tall tree. Back at camp, a hunter prepares the kitchen area for dinner. The men drink beer and celebrate Rosalind's cleverness and skill. Everyone is thrilled that she managed to bring back a boar large enough to feed them all. Ashton shyly holds up the tiny frog he caught, amazed by what she managed to hunt. All the knights of the order think Rosalind is a remarkable woman. Meanwhile, she takes a moment to relax with a drink. Delicious meats are cooked that night. Different cuts roast over the fire, filling the air with a mouth-watering aroma. One perfectly roasted piece of meat is seasoned with rosemary, tomatoes, and parsley. A skilled cook with beautiful green hair prepares a special dish. Rosalind is stunned by how beautiful the meal looks. The meat appears juicy and tender, and the vegetables perfectly grilled. The young woman has done her best to cook with ingredients gathered from the wild. Everyone eagerly awaits Rosalind's meal. She takes a big bite of the meat with great enthusiasm. The cook asks what she thinks, and Rosalind, impressed, says everything tastes delicious. Then the young woman begins to talk about all the spices, preparation methods, and culinary curiosities, none of which Rosalind truly understands, but she enjoys listening anyway. Rosalind tells the young woman with green hair, whose name is Hallie, that it's the best food she's ever had in her life. All the girls burst into laughter, delighted by Rosalind's compliment. Richard watches the conversation and laughter of the women from a distance. Hallie offers Rosalind more food, insisting she must want seconds. He keeps his eyes on the young knight without showing any expression. Suddenly, something unsettles him in his thoughts. He feels like an awkward teenager again. Without understanding why, the prince keeps remembering that night when he drank several bottles of wine with Rosalind. Even if he won't admit it, we can imagine that moment meant something special to him. However, the young woman doesn't seem to have attached the same importance to it. His gaze then shifts to Diego. The young blonde prince sits alone, seemingly distracted. Another bashful boy around women. His delicate features and golden eyes clearly mark him as family. Richard wonders who he might be looking at. He turns to find out. Diego's gaze is fixed on Rosalind, who's surrounded by the expedition's young women, happily eating more and more meat. Richard tries to decipher the meaning of that lingering look. And silently, he begins to think. Night falls over the camp, the forest calm and seemingly safe. The knights on guard duty wonder where Rosalind might be, and one of them guesses she's probably keeping watch from a tree nearby. He's right. The young woman is peacefully dozing on a branch. Suddenly, something slowly awakens her, and she reaches for her sword. Rosalind's eyes snap open. Before her stands the little shadow squirrel she encountered earlier that day. The tiny creature approaches as if trying to speak, but it squeaks in squirrel language, impossible for Rosalind to understand. She explains that she's never eaten squirrel before, so she doesn't understand what it's saying. The squirrel backs away, giving up on communication, and decides to change form. But Rosalind has a quick idea. Assessing the situation, she realizes they're far enough from the tents. She removes the cloak she was wearing and throws it over the squirrel just as it begins to transform. A few soft groans follow. Orange strands of hair peek from beneath the cloak as it starts to move. A beautiful woman emerges, complaining about how fragile human bodies are. With bright blue eyes, the shadow creature asks if Rosalind can finally understand her now. She mutters that living as an animal in the forest is far better. Rosalind is in shock. She remembers how hard it was for her to learn to form human words. She began by mimicking what she heard the servants saying. Rosalind notices that the shadow woman can articulate speech as well as a human. The fair-haired woman insists it's nothing special. Then she reveals that she once lived for years with an old woman who thought she was her granddaughter, allowing her to feed and learn the human tongue. The shadow woman asks Rosalind how she's managing to live among humans. Was it permanent? Uncomfortable? She continues, saying that their kind was meant to stay away from humans. Or does Rosalind feel differently? Rosalind remembers clearly how she used to avoid humans when she lived as a shadow in the forest. She was never afraid of the monsters she encountered, always disguising herself perfectly. But whenever she saw a human, she ran as fast as she could. Even when she disguised herself as a little girl, she would still flee. The shadow woman asks what, or who, she was always running from. Grabbing Rosalind by the shoulders, she demands to know if she had dared to eat a living human. Rosalind recoils in fear as the woman shakes her by the shoulders. Rosalind's silence says it all. The shadow woman becomes furious and asks if she's lost her mind. Rosalind begs her to lower her voice so the people at camp won't hear them. Shaking Rosalind violently, the woman scolds her, saying that although they were never the most rational beings, such behavior was far too dangerous. Rosalind watches as the woman asks if she doesn't know what happens when they make a forbidden pact. Now, Rosalind is doomed to remain in that body forever. She sighs, admitting she's already accepted her fate. And the woman demands, is that all she has to say? Since there's nothing to be done, at least it's good to know she's made peace with it. Living beings cannot be consumed by shadows. They can still eat prepared food by taking other forms, but that is only a means of nourishing the physical vessel they choose to inhabit. For shadows to sustain their existence, they had to return to their natural state, a form of black smoke, and consume beings that had already passed on. If a shadow ever grew too bold and absorbed something still alive, something terrible would happen. Rosalind reveals to the shadow woman that she can still transform into animals, or beings she once consumed in the past, but she can no longer return to being a shadow. The woman asks if she realizes how dangerous that is for their kind. Rosalind admits she was terrified when she realized what she had done. She grows anxious, thinking she might never be able to become a shadow again. If she had known that, she would never have made the pact. But then she remembers the people she met, like Raymond, who told her that being his friend was better than having 1,000 friends. She thinks of her apprentices, Mia and Eddie. Though weak, they are her pupils and very special to her. And then there's Charles, who accepted her as his sister even after she revealed her true identity. Even if she doesn't want to admit it, she's also grown attached to a prince with silver hair. Richard has become someone important to her, but at that moment she's deep in thought. The next day, the prince looks at her with a terrified expression, and she innocently asks him what the problem is. Rosalind had brought an enormous eagle to camp, but unlike what everyone thought, the bird wasn't meant to be eaten. All the knights are amazed by the size of the creature. It must be the queen of all eagles in the empire. Richard asks what she intends to do with it, and he also asks where she found it. Rosalind and her friend, who had transformed into the eagle, are both irritated by all the questions. Rosalind hopes Richard will believe that humans simply travel around with giant eagles. Her friend thinks they ask far too many questions. The night before, during their conversation, the shadow woman had confessed that normally she wouldn't involve herself in such matters, but it was too dangerous to leave Rosalind alone. The shadow woman told Rosalind she would stay nearby as long as needed and would help whenever possible. Rosalind tells Richard that she knows this eagle. Richard no longer knows what to believe and gives up trying to make sense of it all. Ashton and Raymond approach. Raymond remarks that the bird is magnificent. The two of them are awestruck by its beauty. Rosalind says she's had it since last night, leaving everyone speechless. While smoothing a few feathers, Rosalind adds that the eagle is only a few centuries old. Then they surprise the two by asking the eagle's name. Rosalind says her name is Lady Macarin. The eagle grows completely serious, unable to stand such nonsense. What kind of name is that? The eagle takes flight and dives skillfully through the air. With her sharp talons, she snatches up an animal. From atop their horses, the knights watch in awe as Lady Macaron captures another fox. They find her utterly fascinating. She's more skilled than many of the knights in the order. Hearing the men talking, Richard draws back one of the carriage curtains. He's exhausted by all of this. Lady Macaron lands gracefully on Rosalind's arm. Richard notices that Rosalind always ends up at the center of every event. That only makes it harder for him not to notice her. It also explains the love-struck looks from Prince Diego. Then, the commander of the knights appears at the carriage window with a message for Richard. He tells the prince that they are approaching the gates of Balta. The prince thinks to himself, whatever comes, he's ready. The knight commander orders everyone to stay alert. Balta is near. Lady Macaron lets out a piercing eagle cry and soars overhead while the knights take up a defensive formation. Ahead, Prince Richard's convoy stops before the gates of the Kingdom of Balta, guarded by 2 sentries. Rosalind, mounted on a white horse, takes in every detail and realizes they've finally reached the end of their journey. Lady Macaron flies above Balta's capital, Livita, observing its distinctive architecture, palaces, and gardens. One of the guards orders the gates to be opened. The heavy doors begin to move, lifting a cloud of sand. From within, a small contingent of soldiers approaches, carrying spears. Their expressions are stern and faintly threatening, and they utter not a single word as they draw near. The knight commander and his men stand ready to defend against whatever might come. The soldiers of Balta stare at the knights gravely. What's about to happen? And that's it for today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the story. I think Richard feels more for her than he wants to admit, especially after that wine scene. And I also love the bits of comedy in the story, like how she's all serious and still gives a dessert name to a bird of prey. But what about you? What are your thoughts? Do you think our knight is ready for that challenge? Is there something you're curious or excited about? Tell me more in the comments. And if you want more, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any new ones I post. The name of this work is The Night Without Shadows, and our recap went up to episode 18. Kisses, and see you next time.